Hola. Hola.
Hello. Good morning. And thank you for coming along today to these sessions that we're organizing on superhumanity, particularly focused on the social media. So to go over a little bit what we did yesterday. Yesterday we had a presentation of two books, Are We Human, which is one of the compendiums by Beatriz and Mark Wigley and Beatriz Colomina. So these were the ideas that could be seen in the last Biennale in Istanbul. And really one of the aims of design is to redesign human beings, and through design of human beings also we get to the notion itself of design. So with this concept, one of the main aspects was specifically an invitation of a series of writers, philosophers, architects, etc., to come along and reflect upon this idea of design through the context of Boris Groys. So from there we started with a collaboration with Influx and various other speakers talking about Superhumanity, the second book presented, which is on sale here if you want to buy it in the coffee break or lunch break. It's at a reduced price, and there we see the participation of artists like Ido Steyer, architects Neva Wilson, and others. Many important figures of today. So a little bit about the program for today and some domestic logistics, as it were. We have simultaneous translation into Spanish and into English, particularly for Mark Wigley's presentation, which will come now. That'll be English into Spanish, and there'll be also a session for questions. You can ask questions in Spanish or in English, as we have a translation, although Mark Wigley actually understands Spanish perfectly. So the sessions today are fairly intensive. We've got different speakers from architecture, art, from performance, and also we'll have sociologists. And one of the elements, or one of the people that is coming this afternoon, usually says about social media something that I really like. It sums up very much the ideas today. And normally social media are seen as something banal, something to do with alienation, really. But many revolutions or many elements of design that we see today can also start off or be designed through social media. There are elements like political action or Me Too, Black Lives Matter, started as hashtags or started in social media, and from there they took off to move to other political and social structures, which have also, this is also redesigned politics. So another speaker talks about if we touch like, if we click on like in Facebook, we're not going to have a revolution. When we meet together, we're not making a revolution. And when we make a revolution, it won't be a revolution either. It'll be a different thing in this century. So liking things, selfies, doing all those things, I think they can give rise to certain revolutionary ideas as regards the design and redesign of society, of citizenship. So thank you very much to Design Festival of Madrid, and particularly to the foundation, Telefónica Foundation, who've made this possible. Alberto, Alvaro, Teresa, Sarah. So we'll start with Mark Wigley, with one of the presentations up to 11 o'clock. Then we'll have a coffee break then, and we'll continue at 11:30. Mark Wigley, I don't think needs much introduction. He is from the University of Columbia, emeritus professor, one of the key people in the process of thinking, process of architecture, taken from an ironic and affective point of view. and one of his last books or his latest exhibition that he'll be talking about, which will open very soon in New Hugh Institute in Amsterdam, talks about the human insect and some of their relationships. So if with no more ado, I'll leave you with Mark.
Gracias. It's super nice to be here. I think the idea is that I talk a little bit this morning, a bit boring, so that in the afternoon everything becomes more beautiful, and in the afternoon is the really serious conversation. So the social media, let's say, is super serious, super important. What I explained to you now is more like a kind of entertainment. It's kind of like a story. More or less, if social media is a story of the 21st century, I tell you a story about 20th century, something like this. So the prehistory, what comes before social media. If you could hold the earth in your hands, and by the way, if you look in the media, every day you are invited to think that the earth is something that you can hold. Maybe in the 1960s, the earth was something you could see for the first time, like you could see with your eye. Now it's something that you hold. Even you could stroke it like it's a pet. When people talk about climate change, for example, they're inviting you to think about the planet is something like this, that you should take care, right? If you will stroke the earth like this, you will feel some prickles on your fingers. No, you will feel something. What you will feel is antenna. Because on the top of every mountain, there is an antenna. On the top of every hill, of every building, and then the little buildings, the cell phone towers, and then the cell phone towers, and then on your car, and in your hand, and in your pocket. All of you have antenna inside your pockets. And if you do not have the antenna inside your pocket, you do not feel human anymore. No, we talked a bit about this yesterday, and it's so smooth. But this is the antenna here. So Apple is saying you cannot see the antenna; it's secret. But we show you one thing from the inside. We show you the antenna. Everything in the phone is a secret except for the antenna. And inside, many secrets. Right, much more powerful mechanism than was used in the spacecraft to go to the moon. Right, very, very super high technology, but all secret except for the antenna, and the antenna is on the edges. The antenna is, of course, the feelers of the insect, and be careful, you should take insects very serious. They do not take humans very serious, by the way, insects, they don't care about us. But they are 50% of the animal life on this planet, and they are 90% of the biodiversity. And they have been here for millions of years before humans and will be here millions of years afterwards. And are they interested in social media? No, they're completely bored. Do they care about iPhones? No. Do they obey architecture? No. They are architectural disobedience. They sneak in and around. There are many insects in this room. Telefonica is working hard that you cannot see these insects. If you're an architect, you are working hard to hide the insects. We don't like insects because they do not use the front door. They do not even use the windows. They are everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. And an insect has two antennae and a body. That's it. Insect is two antennae and a segmented body. But what's amazing is that the antennae are not attached to the body or attached to the brain. They are part of the brain. You see the antenna comes into the bee and then forms the brain of the bee. So actually the antenna is the brain on the outside of the body. It's a complete confusion of the inside and the outside, right? So it's a piece of brain. Actually, the only purpose for the body is to position the antenna in the right place, right? So an insect is actually it's a brain like this, and the body is moving the brain around in the world. And if we look closely at the antenna is not a thin, delicate thing, but much more complicated, super sexual, right? Many things coming out and many things going in. It's kind of having sex with itself. If you think about it, it has to, because a piece of the brain, a piece of the inside on the outside. So the antenna is a kind of architectural confusion of inside and outside. It's a huge surface, very, very sensitive. For example, if you are a moth, for example, you are a male moth, you need to have sex with a female. And after you have sex, you will die. So it's very, very important that you have sex. And for that, you have to have an antenna that can detect one molecule from the woman. One molecule. She can be 1 kilometer away, but you get one molecule. And you fly to your sexy death. No? So you need an instrument like this. When we zoom up closely, it's much more complex, super, super sensitive. And it gets like this. We are still looking at this bee. And with the antenna, the insects can read radioactivity, gravity, smell, weight, force, wind. Very, very complex, very sophisticated. Now, of course, the bees are dying. Nobody knows why the bees are dying. So now we put our own radios on the bees to find out where they die. Because if the bee dies, then the flowers die. And if the flowers die, all the plants die. And if all the plants die, we die. So right now, it's very important for humans to understand what's happening to the bee. So we put radio on the bee to find out where the bee is going. This is the poor bee with its new equipment. Here is an ant with a radio on it. Because we are, as humans, always attaching antenna to things and watching where they move. This is the new pill that became legal 1 month ago. When you take this pill, it digests in your stomach, and eventually the radio transmitter inside sends out a signal to your watch, and your watch talks to your doctor and tells your doctor that you took the pill. So this is a new kind of surveillance of the inside of your body to let people know that you are eating the medicine. So the antennae are inside you. They're not simply attached to the outside, but they are inside you. Here is a little piece of smart dust. Right? Looking more closely, smaller and smaller. This is real smart dust. If you have smart dust on your body now, you don't know it. That's why it's a technology of spies. But it's this small, and it looks like this. So if you think that your cell phone is small, forget about it. It's huge. This is a nano antenna. So this is a nanoscale inside the body. It looks, of course, this graphics are just graphics, but this means you can construct on the inside of the body a little antenna which is sending signals that can be detected. So now every operation at the molecular level of your body can be communicated by the antenna. So the antennas are on you, in your pocket, in your stomach, in your organism, on your spaceships, on your airplanes, on your drones, on your pet dog. They're on the water measuring the sea movements, on missiles, right? They are absolutely everywhere. This is your antenna. This is a piece of your body. This is Voyager 2. This is in interstellar space. It goes 1 million miles each day. And it is part of your body because it's sending the signals back to you, giving you information about interstellar space. So you have kind of an antenna on the inside of your body, but you also have a piece of your body moving. And of course, it's a piece of the body that we share. All of us. This is a piece of all of our bodies. So before we think about social media and say how fantastic that we are all talking and saying that we like the pasta. For example, right now, it's impossible to eat pasta without making a posting of the pasta before you eat it. So in a way, the image of the pasta has to be eaten before you eat the pasta itself. And we are trying to have a congress here to discover what does that really mean. But understand that we are already sharing this kind of technology. And again, it keeps going and going. All these antennae that we have put around the Earth. So actually the space of antenna, the kind of ecology of antenna, is bigger than the planet. And you are somehow suspended in that. So you have antennas on your body, on the outside of your body, on the inside of your body, in outer space. And the whole world can be described in these kind of communication terms. And already in 1927, Buckminster Fuller, who was the very first person to say that the Earth is something that you need to protect, that it is a spaceship, that it is the whole Earth, that we all share this one Earth, that we share it like a house, that it is one house moving at 35,000 miles an hour all the time. So we are here, for example, in Telefonica, moving at 35,000 miles. At the end of lectures, people would ask Buckminster Fuller, Mr. Fuller, sir, that was a great lecture. Do you believe in life in outer space? And he used to say, excuse me, where do you think you are? right? So he communicates the idea that we are all astronauts operating with this technology, and therefore he makes his house, his first proposal for a house is just a radio antenna. So the idea is that you have a Zeppelin and you see a piece of land that you like, so you drop a bomb and you make a hole, and then you lower your house like a tree into the hole here, and it's a radio antenna on the top, and the top floor is with radio. Because if you have an antenna, and if you live inside an antenna, then you don't need to go to school, because school will come to you. You don't need to connect to anybody else. You are in a kind of autonomous living condition. So not only would he say that spaceship Earth is a spaceship, but each house, and it's a kind of a house, but each house inside that spaceship is itself a kind of a spaceship. So already in 1927, you have architects saying the future of architecture is the antenna. Because my argument is something like this, that insects are amazing, and the real brain of the insect is not inside the body of the insect, but is when the insect touches the antenna. If you have a conversation with an ant, and I'm sure you have some friends that are more or less like insects, when you ask an ant, is it enjoying carrying a piece of sugar from one side of the room to the other, it probably will say back to you, what do you mean sugar? Because it has no knowledge, let's say, no independent knowledge of the sugar, but it has received information from the antenna that it should carry this thing from A to B. So all of the ants together make a kind of intelligent community. The ant colony is an extraordinarily sophisticated, intelligent brain. So the real brain of the insect is coming from when the antennas touch and exchange information. And we are mainly afraid of insects. We are scared of insects because of this kind of disobedience. Even the fact that they have been living for millions of years before us is kind of insulting to us, because we think we are so important. We have a huge fear of the cockroach, for example. Many writers have discussed what it means that you wake up one morning and you have become an insect. This is the great fear that we have. But we already became insects at the end of the 19th century when we developed our own radio antenna, and much of our behavior is kind of radio-like, and maybe social media is like the space between the antenna of the insects, where you construct a new kind of brain. For example, before the election in the United States, people were asked, will you vote for Donald Trump? And they would say no. But it was based on an old idea that people make decisions and they make votes. But actually, in the world of social media, you never vote. You just swim with many other people, and at the last minute, maybe you swim towards the voting machine, but you never make a decision. I will vote for this. You make a kind of collective social media movement. You swim. So in a certain way, lots of people were swimming in a certain direction, and as a result, we have, of course, this extraordinarily important intellectual as the leader of the United States. So it's a different kind of logic, because again, if you ask the voter why they vote for Donald Trump, it's like asking the ant, why is the ant carrying the piece of sugar? It has no idea. You can ask a Donald Trump voter, probably they say, what is Donald Trump? Who is Donald Trump? This is not the issue. The issue is kind of this circulation. So already in the 20s, architects are starting to think about that. This is a typical Buckminster Fuller drawing of the world. You see that the radio antenna are bigger than the planet. Everything that radio does is a transformation. If I add, if you have a very important building and you put an antenna on it, no matter how important the building, what's most important is the antenna, because the antenna creates communication with the other side of the world. In reverse, the smallest, most insignificant building, if it has an antenna, has a huge power. This is why architects hate antenna, because antenna have the capacity to infantilize architecture, to make it seem absolutely small, but also to make it seem, small architecture seem absolutely big. So already this kind of reaction, and then he's designing his house, Dymaxion house. It's just a radio station, right? It's a radio station made of of plastic and metal. This is the most intense architect of radio is Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is 1922. Frank Lloyd Wright is making a house that will float on water, and you see that the kind of pyramid on the roof is the antenna of the house. The house can move because it has radio. Radio means that every building becomes a ship, and every ship becomes a building. This is a very dramatic transformation of the status of architecture. So it floats in the liquid of the lake, but also floats in the liquid of radiation. like this. So you're producing an image in which architecture becomes almost like a mirage, with the antenna on the top, and the antenna on top is actually producing the architecture. This is not an architecture that's made on the ground. Frank Lloyd Wright, you don't make a building on the ground and then move up. This is a building hanging from radio waves, hanging from the air. Here's another one, another house with the radio antenna, 1922. And this is the effect of those radio antennae. You see, even the sky starts to become architecture. So Frank Lloyd Wright is thinking very much in 1922 that radio is the beginning of a new architecture of radiation. In 1922, he has the most powerful radio in the United States, and he's one of the 10 or 20 people who are receiving a special news broadcast directly to his house. He's completely radio obsessed. He is Mr. Radio Architect. So there is a kind of radio architecture, but of course, if we think the architecture of antenna, if we think where did the architecture of the human insect be? Of course, we go to Russia, 1919, Tatlin, the most famous building, maybe one of the 3 or 4 most iconic designs of 20th century. But if you see at the top, it's actually a radio station. This geometry, the spiraling, twisting geometry, this is rotating once a year for the annual meeting of all the members. This is rotating once a month. This is like for the secretariat who's receiving information from below. Above is the cylinders rotating once a day. And on the top, in the hemisphere, is a radio station. It's permanently spinning. And the one part of the building that doesn't follow this twisting geometry, you see, are the 2 radio aerials. Because this, with radio, only with radio, could you have a socialist state. Right? Everybody connected. Not just in Russia, but the whole world. So this is 400 meters high to communicate the revolutionary force. And it is over the river where the revolution starts. So in Russia, 1919, radio, the antenna, is the very possibility of social revolution. You know that the revolution in Russia was a radio revolution. First of all, they take the radio stations. Then they broadcast the success of the revolution on radio. Lenin thought that radio was a newspaper without paper. So it's a radio. The radio was everywhere. You see the model. He builds the model, and he's very careful to put the wire of the radio in the top of the model. Just to give you a sense of the size, Shukov, the famous engineer, then designs this tower to be a radio tower bigger than the Eiffel Tower. They don't have enough money, so they build just this one on the left, but this was the model, right? So you get the kind of heroic antenna, and here is Shukov's tower, so beautiful. Why so beautiful? Because it is very much like Bucky Fuller. It's an architecture that tries to be as little material as possible. It's almost not there. And this is the thing about the antenna. The antenna is the thinnest part of the building. It is the most invisible part of the building. It is just a wire, but this wire is also the wire that is the connection between the physical, visible world of architecture and the invisible world of radiation. So actually the front door for architecture is not the front door, for example, here on the street. The real front door is the antenna that connects each building to the atmosphere. In a very real sense, the antenna is the beginning of architecture. Architecture, as it were, comes out of the antenna. It's not you have architecture and then you put an antenna on top. Architecture is somehow an extension of the antenna. This somehow was seen to visualize that. Here it is being assembled. It's assembled like a telescope. Just to give you a sense of the size, it's not small. This is explicitly commissioned by Lenin. This will be the mechanism. But of course, what was so beautiful about it is already people felt like the visual look of this antenna was like looking at radio waves. It was kind of a visual image of radio. And images like this by Rodchenko become very, very classic images in Russian constructivist photography. Again, Rodchenko on the left and Rodchenko on the right. So delicate. But of course, this is not really the antenna. This is just the structure holding up the antenna. The antenna are the wires that are at the top, very, very difficult to see. 1923, the Vesnin brothers make this entry to the Palace of Labor competition. They call this project Antenna. And you can see all the action is in the roof. Right? Down below, it's kind of solid. It is actually Tatlin's project in a slight variation. Because it has an antenna, it is real. What makes the building real is not the solidity or the concrete, but the delicacy of the wires. If you take the wires off, it cannot be the Palace of Labor, right? And they're obsessively drawing the wires. By the way, if you think about it, to make an architecture of radio is not such a difficult assignment for architects, because architects have always been experts in making the invisible visible. Think of classical Greek architecture. The idea of classical Greek architecture is to make visible the invisible proportions of the universe, right? Resonant vibrations, right? So in a way, the architecture of radio, it's just a variation of the classical position of the architect. But here you have it, project after project. So if it's a university, if it's a newspaper, if it's a factory, you can see how important a building is by how big is the antenna. Right? A very big building needs, a very important building needs a very big antenna, and not so important building needs a small antenna. Every project. Again and again and again. And of course by 1927 you have the most amazing project of all, the Lenin Institute, the library of Leonidov, who's the student of Vesnin, who was the student of Tatlin and so on, in a kind of very, very clear line. Here there's a total confusion of what is the structure holding the building up and what is the structure of the radio signal. It is the same thing. This is architecture inside an antenna. These are the classic drawings of Leonidov. And these are not futuristic. These are not dreams of what could be, let's say, a possible architecture. These are images of a realism, of the realism of radio. Leonidov is arguing here is his new social club. Look at the way that the architecture is so small and the radio is so big. This is the new relationship. That architecture is just the beginning. The real architecture is in the antenna. In fact, and this is the Linear City project, Leonidov will argue that radio is the true monument of our day. It is the real strength of the monument, is the radio antenna. So something very, very thin, a set of wires, takes on all of the kind of value normally associated with something solid. If you think about it, if the role of architecture is to provide shelter, communication, protection, but also exposure, radio is much more, the responsibility is carrying out much more responsibility for architecture than buildings. So in a certain sense, antenna have become the space of architecture. If you have a small apartment building, it needs its own radio set. This is the monument to Christopher Columbus, 1928, in which radio becomes this broadcasting station. The buildings down below are very, very small, and what are they? They are radio stations, radio research centers. This is for sending images globally by picture. Remember the reality of the time, the most powerful radio station at the time is on the top of the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower, everybody hates the Eiffel Tower. Right? This building was to be destroyed. It was saved because Eiffel said to the French military, you know, you could put a radio on the top, and he himself paid for the radio station to be on the top, and the moment they put it on the top, the military suddenly realized, we keep the Eiffel Tower. So the Eiffel Tower only exists for radio, and this is how it worked. Huge Eiffel Tower, big wires, all coming down to a tiny little shed. So this is the most powerful architecture in the world. This stupid little building here, this is the powerful building. This romantic building, which says, you know, it's very famous, right? Siegfried Gideon says you go up into the Eiffel Tower and inside becomes outside. You don't know where you are. You're suspended in interpenetrating space. But the real interpenetrating space is that stupid little box. This is the response by the Americans. They build this, the Three Sisters. This is a huge building. And it's trying to be impressive. Like this is the United States saying, oh, we are not Europe, but we are also good and important. We are sort of neoclassical. Nobody cares about this building when this is the real architecture. And even the drawing of the antenna at the top, this triangle, much, much more beautiful than this building. So it's a very good, and this building is communicating directly with the Eiffel Tower. So for the first time you have, you know, communication across the Atlantic from these two structures. This is how the Americans visualize the fact that the world has become small with radio. This is how the French visualize it. Of course, the French, it's clear. Eiffel Tower rules the world. For the Americans, it's clear. The Three Sisters in Arlington rule the world. The Germans go one step further. It could be more than one world. But notice that the world is now hanging from radio. It's not world plus radio, but world inside radio. The French then come with this amazing image where the world itself is tied to the Eiffel Tower. The world itself becomes just like a balloon, very French. We are the world, right? We control the world. And it's actually, it's about all the different wireless stations. This is the original drawing of Zhukov for the 350-meter tower that he would like to have built. Again, to remind you that this structure has nothing to do with radio. There is another antenna here, very boring, and the real antenna is going between them. You see that loop? That's the real antenna. So usually the architecture of the antenna is not the real antenna, but is somehow near the antenna, or a kind of image of the antenna, image of a kind of a mirage. So these kind of images, which are like radio, these are the very first predictions by Maxwell of what radio waves would look like. These are the images that were confirmed by Hertz, and because this looks like that, we tend to associate radio architecture with this. This is Hertz's very first radio antenna. And this is the drawing that he does, very, very similar. So somehow this physical architecture is producing this invisible architecture. Marconi steals the idea. Marconi was the best at stealing ideas. He was really a mean guy, very, very sadistic even, fascistic explicitly. He then takes the technology of Hertz and invents the idea of the vertical antenna. Hugely important. He hangs it up in the air. He puts a piece of it in the ground, and he discovers he can send a signal across the garden, then across the hill, then across the English Channel. The Germans try to catch up. They're using, of course, the old antenna of a church. Of course, the church is an antenna, right? Trying to get a signal from the higher authority. The French join in with their experiments. The antennas start to arrive in the city, not just in the isolated places, but in the city itself. Again, stupid little box becomes very, very powerful. Germany again. We start putting them on ships. There is a kind of architecture of the antenna. This is Marconi's ship. This is Marconi's antenna with which he's trying to communicate across the channel. This is the antenna with which he communicates to the United States for the first time, 1901. He starts to draw all the different possible antennas. Again, always the same story. You can either say this is very stupid, boring architecture becoming very powerful for the antenna, or the other way around, that you don't care about that architecture. This is the United States. Again, the little house with the big antenna. Great romance about the way in which we would be linked together by the antennas. That the tallest skyscraper in New York would be linked to the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower, here are the little huts at the Eiffel Tower. Literally the most powerful spaces. There it is. The maximum strength of architecture is here. Certain Swiss architects will love that. This is the chain of radio antenna that will create. This is from the pages of the New York Times. None of this is kind of a secret. This is really everybody's talking about radio. This is a new kind of interior that's at the size of the Pacific. You see, it's for the American military. It's bigger than the United States. So with a chain of radio antenna, they can create an architecture, a space, an interior space in which they can live and operate and communicate. That's bigger. A new kind of architecture, a new kind of invisible architecture. Marconi starts again showing you, again, the world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You get used to seeing it this way. 1913, in Germany, they imagine, what if all the different radio networks of the French, the Italians, the Germans, the Russians, the Americans would be linked into one network, which is called a world project. So kind of an image of the World Wide Web, an image of interconnectivity. Of course, 1 month later, war, and all of these military networks become, of course, military networks. But you see this kind of fantasy, fantasy of interconnectivity and exchange of information, more or less continuously across the planet. The antennas start to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we are here just outside Berlin, and it's 100 meters high, 1906. Here it is, 100 meters, stupid architecture below. Every time the antenna gets bigger, they add another piece to the building below. All right, so up now to 150 meters, then to 200 meters. See more buildings. Then even bigger, 260 meters high. Now it's this high. See, now in 1914, starts to be the same size of Eiffel Tower. Traditional architecture, even a famous cathedral, nothing. Just somewhere in the middle. The antenna spreads. This is the same antenna outside Berlin, just basically spreading its wings. Then at this point, you see that it's 2.5 kilometers long, and architecture is still very small in the middle. and the ability to communicate to the world, again, from this one place, from this one architecture. And that architecture is for the first time designed by an architect. This is a building by Mutesius. Mutesius, the great kind of cultural spy and kind of aesthetic diplomat. And of course, this is, I would say, a bit like a railway station. In the same way that a railway station tried to domesticate the huge fear that everybody had about the shocking ability to go by train from one city to another, you make a kind of classical railway station as a kind of anesthetic against this kind of shock, to use the language of yesterday. This is a kind of anesthetic which says, don't worry, radio is very strange that we can talk from one place to every place in the world, but this kind of official architecture makes you feel everything's okay. And in this image, it looks like architecture is strong and powerful and symmetrical, and it's as if the antennas are the backup singers. It's like the building is singing the main song, and the antennas are just dancing in the background, but it's kind of the other way around. The real song is in the spider's web in the sky, and the building is really, really small. Here's the building at the middle of this enormous spider's web, like this. Now we're in 1923. So if we are insects, if we are becoming insects, our antennas are getting bigger and bigger and more powerful. It becomes possible for one human being to be sensitive to signals coming from the other side of the planet. A human that, and of course they still try to pretend that architecture is somehow in control, that Mutesius' building, which is floating in the space of radio, of trans radio, is somehow has the whole world at its organization. It's going back to this logic, right? Always this logic. This is the equipment. It's very important that architecture never touches this equipment. So even if Mutesius thinks that he's doing something so special, all the radio people are saying, you can do what you like, but don't touch the radio. So in a way, what he's making is like a radio cabinet, you know, which has some electronics on the inside. The most beautiful of all is in the Netherlands, in Kutwijk. It's, again, looks like something Egyptian, maybe a kind of a sphinx when you get closer. Yeah, surely it's a sphinx with some sort of antenna in the background. Is it a church? Is it a sphinx? Is it a factory? It's something about communication. When you come around the side, oh yeah, it's definitely a factory. But it's a factory with wires coming out. You see how the wires have to be insulated. The antenna is never allowed to touch the building. Same with an insect. The big problem for an insect is how to have the piece of the brain on the outside not touching the body. So it has to pass, the brain has to pass from the outside of the body to the inside of the body through a kind of a socket, which is not interfering with the signal. Again, the antenna architecture cannot touch the building. So the wires come out through these big insulators like this. Then they go up to the masts. Then you realize the mast is a little bit bigger than you thought. Then you realize it's actually much bigger than you thought. Actually, it's super, super big. Like this. Architecture starts to seem not very important at all. But actually, that's just one of them. So this is the structure. It looks like this. But the ground is also a huge antenna. So this is an enormous antenna in the ground. And it's like this. So this huge spider's web is being produced. The United States responds with this design, in which each of these will be 12 different antennas, each of them 2 miles long, 300 meters in the air. Like really huge. These are the biggest constructions of humans at that time. So if the antenna is something very, very small, something very, very delicate, is the almost invisible thing between the material world, the visible world, and the invisible world, they're getting really huge. And then you see it even in the logos, right? Worldwide wireless, right? Japan, why not? And at the very, very same time, the antennas are shrinking. So the antenna gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful. At the same time, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Here we are. Don't you wish you had this? By the way, this is what you have now in your pocket, of course, this fantasy. All right, this is 1920. This is a radio show. This is a lucky baby listening to radio in the Berlin radio fair. Or, children are kind of crucial. So radio is also getting huge and getting small at the same time, super small. It's moving into the house. It's becoming domesticated everywhere all the time. Same image, that the world is, under the control of radio. Even two worlds in a way, multiplying again. And all of this going on inside your iPhone. And just to sort of give you a sense, and this is the hole that we have to dig in order to make the iPhone. Right? So this is one of the biggest holes in the world. There are two big mines in the world that dig for the rare earth minerals in the iPhone. These are highly toxic. There are wars fought over these mines. There are more cell phones operating than human beings on this planet. More than every 1 year or so, everybody is throwing away their cell phone. There are mountains of cell phones that are growing. There are now 1 billion cell phones that only talk to other cell phones. So they call and say, how are you doing? I'm doing okay. You okay? I'm okay. So the network is talking to itself like this. So 1 billion phones are busy chatting. The proportion of phones that only talk to other phones goes up and up and up. And the proportion of phones attached to humans also goes up. If you think that, the cell phone is something of the rich, not true. The most aggressive growth in cell phones is in Africa. And the most intense use of cell phones is in Africa. In Africa, you can do everything with the cell phone. In the so-called developed north, you can do a few things with a cell phone. So East Asia and Africa are the super growth markets in the cell phone. So my main point is just that we became another species in the 20th century when we developed the capacity to feel at a huge distance. We can feel the vibrations. We can feel vibrations coming to us from beyond our solar system. We feel it in our bodies, more or less directly. The inside of our bodies can be felt by us all the time. We are wearing some kind of equipment like this. It's always telling us, I'm being told every minute, like it's time to stand. This phone, by the way, every now and then says it's important. It says breathe. It's reminding me to breathe. When I first had this phone, which is recently, in the instructions it said, do you want us to send an emergency signal if there's no sign of a heartbeat for 10 minutes? Which I think means it's finished. So it's I'm really interested to know what would be the message. Like what would be the music? Like Beethoven or Mozart. Dun, 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 dun. I don't know. But we have to understand that this very, very delicate world of the antenna, this almost invisible world, this world that means that we are now swimming in an ecology of antenna all the time, this invisible world is actually completely physical. It's not like magical. It's super, super real. To say it another way, you are in this room, okay, and this room has a very, very precise architecture, almost classical architecture of the semicircle. The room is designed for you to sit and listen and for me to talk. But still your relationship to this room is, casual, really. Like, do you have a feeling for what is below you? Do you have a feeling with what is above? Do you really know what this room is made of? Do you think this room is going to fall down? No. You are inside this room like you're inside an airplane, right? Nobody believes in flight. Like, I never met anybody who thought it made a lot of sense that a metal cigarette should lift up in the air. So when all of us are flying, we're there, but we don't want to think too much about this thing because we don't believe it. And maybe you're occupying this room in the same way. You're sort of here. You vaguely don't pay attention to what's going on around. You don't want to know. You don't want anything to happen in here that reminds you that you are in a room. That's also why you don't want to have insects in this room. Because the moment insects, if a huge insect just walked its way across the stage here, it will be a great trauma for everybody, but especially for Telefónica. Right? It just will be, either this has to be a project, insect project, but really it's fear. It's fear. So you're in this room, let's say in a kind of casual way. You're here, but you're not really here. I don't know if you had the experience that you're looking at your phone and you walk 5 blocks in the city and you get to the other end and you don't remember crossing any streets. And somehow you survive because part of your reptilian brain was keeping an eye on the situation. So you're in the city, but not really in the city, but you're really in the cell phone. Right? So my general argument would be you live in electronic space very, very precisely, with incredible sensitivity and precision, and you live in physical space more or less in a kind of casual way. Architects are responsible for physical space. That means we're responsible for the space in which you don't have a very strong relationship. And this Congress is trying to understand what would be the architecture of the invisible space. If architects were to be serious about the space of social media, what will it mean? And the only point I can make for you is that social media space, whatever it is physical. It is totally real. It is totally tangible. It is probably more real for you than this room that you're sitting in, than this city that you are in, maybe in this, like you may or may not believe in Spain. Right now, actually, it's kind of a conceptual question. Spain has become like a concept. But the phone is not a concept, right? The phone and the phone you use, the same phone you use in Spain, also used in Barcelona, by the way. Also used in Beijing, also used in Bangkok, also used in Amman. In other words, the same phone, same architecture everywhere and connected everywhere. A last thought. Every time you touch your phone and you send a stupid image of your pasta before you eat it. So stupid pasta and stupid image of pasta sent to a stupid friend for no reason, but just the feeling like you should do that. Voila, my pasta. That signal goes under the oceans in fiber optic cables. That image of that pasta is received by every big server farm in the world. The way the system works is it does not say, important message. It just says message. And it digests this message. And it finds the importance in that message. And if 1 billion people send an image of pasta, then somebody is figuring out a way in which they can make money from that. Right? So every time you touch your phone, in the most small way, you activate this global communications network, this enormous brain which is made from physical fabric produced here that uses most of the economy, most of the energy, and it's this enormous, enormous physical structure. So if architects were afraid of the antenna because somehow the antenna infantilized architecture, we didn't even begin yet to understand the size or the space of that. So anyway, I should finish this. The idea was just to say you are insects, get used to it. And if you get used to that idea, maybe, in the rest of the Congress, we can have a serious conversation about what would be the architecture of social media. And I think Ivan has invited an astounding group of very crazy Spanish experts on social media. Thank you.
Tenemos tiempo para alguna pregunta, así que si os animáis a hacer alguna.
So if anybody would like to ask a question, thank you very much indeed for that fantastic presentation.
You know, there's such a thing as a Stockholm syndrome, right? If you listen to a talk for 45 minutes, after a while you're going, yeah. You become like those animals in a car, like, yeah. But maybe after the coffee you have questions,
sí,
right?
En cualquier caso vamos a tener ahora el café y luego podemos.
Okay, so you can ask any questions you have if you like after the coffee. Thank you very much.
Vamos a continuar ahora con...
Let's continue with the first round table. So we'll continue with some of the ideas that we started off with mentioned by Mark this morning, but with a different type of implication. This first panel is devoted to share to an important aspect of the social media. We're going to have Beatriz Colomina and various other speakers, Nicolas Hirsch, Mark Wigley, and Eloy Fernández-Porta. So Beatriz is an architect and director of a program in Princeton, the PhD project, and also other programs. She is well known through her books, her articles, and has also been the curator of many exhibitions being named just now, and also books, private publicity, and one of the main bases of her work has been to find what makes modern architecture modern. It's not so much the architecture itself, but rather its relationship with the media, or perhaps the relationship with the social media as one of its key plus points. Then we have Manuel Segade, who's the director of Dos de Mayo Center, also a curator. He's had a very revealing exhibition in Segade a few years ago on photography in Boston. So there are many connections there also with selfies and how to share an effective base with the images we see of ourselves. And also one of the key exhibitions that you can visit in the Dos de Mayo Center is the Elements of Vogue, which constructs very well how bodies, human bodies, through affection, through relationships, are built politically through this relationship, not in a festive sort of way. Not in a funereal sort of way. So then we also have Andres Jaque, who's an architect, lecturer at the University of Columbia, connected to Princeton. You'll have seen on different occasions, you'll have seen him not long ago in an exhibition, which was a perspective of his work in Tabacalera headquarters related to politics. So these are some of the elements that we'll be able to talk about today through some of the actions taken, not just through his architecture, but this other expanded architecture that he looks at through meeting strangers or other exhibitions that he's had in Oslo and Lisbon in the Triennial exhibition, and also the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And then we'll have also Eloy Fernández-Porta, philosopher, lecturer at the Barcelona University Fabra, and also related to the media through Afterpop and Emotions COC. So without any more ado, I'm just like to say hello to those from streaming or on the streaming.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. And thank you all these people that have organized this great event. We are going to talk, of course, today about social media and the impact that it has on architecture, right? So, in fact, Ivan mentioned privacy and publicity and the relationship between architecture and mass media, which was actually my oldest preoccupation. But in fact, when I wrote that book, there was no internet, no social media, nothing. And I think we are in the middle of a completely different situation, and that is necessary to revisit this question once again. So perhaps the most important transformation in our lives, in our cultural lives, in our economic lives, in our social lives, of course, is social media. After all, has been the arrival of social media at the beginning of the 21st century. With it, of course, a new space for design has opened up. Let me put my glasses on. A space where an unprecedented number of people participate. Through its multiple channels, we not only communicate and collaborate with wider and wider groups, but we also refashion ourselves. Images, videos, emojis, stickers, tweets, GIFs, memes, comments, posts, and reposts are all deployed to construct a very precise image, not necessarily, of course, coinciding with our real life person. An avatar, if you want, launched with seemingly independent thoughts and looks and actions, a perfected self, perhaps the image of who we would like to be, that becomes real online. And of course, there is no limit to how many digital personalities we might maintain at the same time, including anonymous. Well, the surprising thing, I think it was even surprising to me when looking back historically. I'm going to do a super schematic history of social media. There was actually no social media at all in the year 2000. The first social media was Friends Reunited, who was launched in the UK to help people locate all school friends. This was the first successful online social network, and by the end of the year it had 3,000 users. So 3,000 users was considered, oh, finally we got something working. A year later it had 2.5 million people connected, and that was really the beginning of social media. In 2002, Friendster got 3 million users in just 3 months. 2003 was MySpace. Some people here may remember MySpace. Everybody remembers or knows Facebook, which arrived, of course, in 2004 in Harvard University. It was actually copying Friendster. And between a month, half of the college population at Harvard was on Facebook, and soon, as you know, expanded to other colleges, etc. In 2005, Facebook opened to high school students, and 2005 was also the year in which YouTube arrived and advertised itself with this slogan, broadcast yourself, in case you had missed the point about what all of this was about. The year 2006 was Twitter, as well as the year in which Facebook opened to anybody above 13 years old. WhatsApp, very popular in Spain, arrived in 2009 and is actually the most globally successful messaging app with 1.3 billion users right now. KakaoTalk in Korea, super interesting, was launched in the year 2010. And it has really an amazing reach in Korea. 93% of people with a cell phone in Korea is in KakaoTalk. Well, there is all these friends, Kakao friends. You have to identify with one or its own thing. So if you are in Korea, you cannot even have a coffee. You can pay with KakaoTalk. You use it for all these things. So grandmothers and really little kids are on KakaoTalk, so this is also interesting. But the whole Asian social media is super interesting. They have been really leading the way in so many ways, but we don't have a lot of time to get into it. But just to mention KakaoTalk and others, Instagram, of course, was launched in October of 2010. And it has now almost 1 billion users. It's one of the social networks that has risen more rapidly in popularity. 53% of 18 to 29 years old use it, and 26% are older than 29. It's also the one that is considered more urban, the one more used by women, by Latinos, by African Americans, and by designers too. So for once we were on the on the cool side of the story. Line is also super interesting. It's a messenger service for instant communication again, launched in Japan in 2011 and extremely popular in Asia, and particularly in South Korea. It has also a lot of users, 700 million users. It was interesting to me about Line is that it was designed by 15 members of the New Human Network in response to a devastating earthquake that took place in Japan in March of 2011 and destroyed basically all telecommunication infrastructure. So this network was actually the result of a total failure in conventional infrastructure, right? And the stickers are bigger, and artists get involved in the design of the stickers, and all of this. Well, this story, of course, could continue on and on. There has been an exponential acceleration of the number of available channels for broadcast of the self, which is matched by an accelerated number of people using them. There are social networks, as you know, for everything, to find work, LinkedIn, location-based dating apps like Tinder or Grindr. For video, you have Vimeo or YouTube. You have mood boards like Tumblr or Pinterest. The network that has risen more rapidly in popularity among young people is, of course, Snapchat, where, as you know, users can program how long their photos or their videos will be visible by others, and that's between 1 and 10 seconds. So really the question here is that a few seconds has become a space for design. The demographics also are super interesting. This is 2014, so it's very old. I don't have a more recent one, but this is the interesting thing, that already in 2014 the population between 18 and 24 was already dropping out of Facebook and of LinkedIn, etc., and into Snapchat. 45% of the 18 to 24 were already on Snapchat. As older people get on, little by little get onto Facebook, grandmothers get into Facebook and into the earlier. So with each one, a whole movement of people. This is a map of Facebook users in 2010. It had 700 active users, and this was considered super important. Now it has more than 2 billion users. It's estimated that 4 billion people, that is 60% of the world population, are already connected to the internet, with 70% of them engaged in some form of social media, mainly through their cell phone. And again, to repeat something that we say yesterday too, don't even think for 1 minute that this is a question of first world versus third world. This is a Maasai farmer checking the prices of the market before deciding whether it's worth his while to go to the market. Africa is one of the places where the growth of cell phone is bigger. Also, it's a really important tool for migration. You know, these refugees arriving in Lesbos, first thing they do is connect with their cell phone. Not only in the present crisis, but several years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was on a plane reading a newspaper, and there was some interviews of refugees arriving in Europe, and the first thing they asked them, what is the first thing you need? And they never say, oh, I need a bed, or I need a house, or I need a place to sleep, or I need food, or I need water. I need to plug my cell phone. So the cell phone is really a kind of shelter, a tool for survival, but also a kind of shelter that connects refugees to, of course, their families that left behind, but also their friends already making their way through Europe. It's also their navigation tool, so extremely important thing. So, in any case, this represents a complete, the cell phone, the internet, social media represents a complete transformation of the way we live, which have huge implications for architecture and for design. Social media is not really what occurs in the space of this digital space, constructing a new kind of virtual city that has taken many of the functions of the traditional city. We can say that now we inhabit a kind of hybrid space between the virtual and the real. I mean, you can ask yourself, where are these people? If you pay attention a little bit, it looks like they are perhaps waiting for a subway somewhere in Asia, but at the same time they are all in another space. They are connected. So we are now living in this reality, this hybrid space, if you want. Social media, in that sense, redefines and restructures physical space, the spaces of our homes and our cities. As with the arrival of mass media in the early 20th century, social media redraws once again what is public and what is private, what is inside, what is outside. Design, in that sense, in the age of social media, is not just what occurs in the space of this little screen. Social media is redesigning the spaces we live in. Of course, as always, you know, every time a new technology arrives, there is this incredible resistance, as we talked about yesterday. Early 20th century architecture, for example, like Adolf Loos, lamented the effect that photography and the illustrated architectural magazine was having on architecture. He was criticizing particularly Joseph Hoffman, his contemporary, because in Loos' views, his houses appeared to be made for the camera. He thought they had become two-dimensional. They have lost every kind of tectonic quality. It was difficult to tell them apart from a cardboard model, for example. Loos, on the other hand, this is still Hoffman. Loos, on the other hand, said that he was proud of the fact that his clients could not recognize their own house in photographs, which I think, of course, is not really true. Maybe they couldn't recognize this photograph, but there is also something really interesting about the fact that Loos' architecture actually has a photogenic, abstract quality, and actually that he adjusted photographs, adding and removing elements, and even changing the view out of the window, as he did, for example, here in Villa Kuner. Here is Villa Kuner as he was published, and actually this is how the view out of the window was. So he was actually using all the tricks in the books. He is in a way an architect made through the media. We know him through his writing, through the photograph of his buildings, as he is extremely careful in these photographs how he placed this car in the Villa Müller in Prague. I thought that may be the house, the car of the owner, but I was recently in the house again, and that's not the car of the owner. I thought, well, maybe this is an earlier car of the owner. No, the owner died very soon after he moved into the house. The car is still in the garage, completely different car. So Loos liked that car and put that car there, I'm sure, in the same way that he also, and I always thought it was cute, that there was always these little kids in the houses of Adolf Loos, and you know, I thought that's interesting. He's humanizing architecture, because you know there are normally not many people in architecture. But of course, recently I discovered all this story about how when Loos left Vienna from Paris, it was not like, okay, I now go to live in Paris. He was actually accused of pederastia, so and convicted of pederastia. So then all of a sudden I said, oh, okay, I'm not sure what is going on in these pictures anymore. I cannot. Well, if that generation pay a lot of attention to the arrival of the new media, of the photography, of the architectural magazine, and made actually very deliberate attempts to enter into that new space. Now we have a new generation that some of them are here in the room, that is being asked not just by their young clients but also by institutions to design spaces that look good on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, etc. Even competitions such as the PS1 in MoMA in New York, the Young Architects Pavilion, take into consideration how Instagrammable, I think you told me that story, right? How Instagrammable your winning entry will be. So, of course, any building will be experienced far more often in social media than in the streets, and the encounter with the streets already shaped by what we have seen in social media. So, where a generation ago, and of course that was the pavilion of Cosmos, of Andrés Jaque and the Office of Political Innovation, and that's the Escobedo from Mexico. Okay, so if a generation ago design was concerned particularly with its reception in the printed media, in newspapers, in professional journals, in magazines, and look at the care with Meets and Philip Johnson have placed themselves into this the cover of these magazines now, and how they commission extremely important photographers to do these few black and white or like Ezra Stoller and all of them. If all that effort went into this, now we really are not so much concerned with this. And how recent this is, I'm struck by the fact that, I don't know whether you were in the Venice Biennale in 2010, that was the Biennale of Sejima, of China, And there was this room that Rem Koolhaas dedicated to the role of the architect and all of that. And he had all these covers of magazines and new, etc., like Time, etc., trying to demonstrate how at a certain point, like in the 50s, architects were actually in the covers of magazines, and now nobody cares, right? So, and we went all to this exhibition and we said, yeah, that's really terrible. You see, there was a time in which architects were important, and we were in the cover of magazines, and now nobody cares about us with a disgraceful situation. And now, you know, in very few years, it's like, who cares? I mean, these magazines are closing, nobody's buying them, nobody gives a damn. So the important thing is no longer whether you are in the cover of a magazine. That's kind of a very old idea. It became old like 2 years after that exhibition, I suppose. So the concern now is, of course, with reception in social media, how many tweets, how many likes, how many followers, how many reposts, the ultimate goal being a design going viral. But it's not, as I say, the expansion, or it's not simply the expansion of reception that I am interested here. The internet and social media, as I said before, are fundamentally redefining the spaces in which we live, our relationship to objects and to each other. Social media, in that sense, is a new form of urbanization, actually the architecture of how we live together. And I think this is important. We need to understand the world in which we live. Architects and theorists may be the last to realize how architectural actually this change is. What are the consequences of this state of things? What is the architecture and urbanism of social media? This is the question that I'm interested in right now. And where to investigate this, where to start investigating this massive event. In 1999, I read an article in the New York Times that said that 250,000 people were exposing their lives online, and that 1 million webcams had been sold only that year. And we were all kind of astonished. 1 million webcams, and all these people exposing themselves on the internet. But today, there are billions that regularly expose themselves online, what they are eating and other things, right? The line between what is private and what is public, what is inside and what is outside, has been, in that sense, radically redrawn. Let's start by asking the simplest of all architectural questions. Where is all of this happening? What is the space of social media? Well, again, it's kind of difficult to find data, but a 2013 Australian survey said that 34% of social network users were logging on at work. Okay, that's normal, your work, you login. 13% in school, the same thing, but more control, so less people. Like 18% in their cars. Well, that's getting a bit dangerous, right? 44% in bed. 44% in bed, right? 7% in the bathroom and 6% in the toilet. You know what I find more shocking about these statistics? Where is the house? So we are talking about the bed and the toilet, but it's like we are doing 44% and connecting in the internet in the bed, in this space that is floating without house, without living room, without even bedroom, right? So the bed has become in a way the epicenter of a whole new universe. Now, another newspaper that I picked up by chance was the Wall Street Journal. In the year 2012, we are still in the middle of the economic crisis in the United States, and the Wall Street Journal, which I never read, but it must have given to me in a hotel as I was giving a lecture or something like that, and I'm in the plane reading this, and I read 80% of young professionals in New York are working in bed. I said, that's crazy. How did that happen? Because I knew already that many office buildings in Midtown Manhattan were kind of half empty, despite keeping appearances at the door with all these guards and all this security that you have to pass. They was actually empty. So at the same time that many people were out of work and that offices were empty, millions of people, a kind of an army of dispersed workers were working like this woman from bed, right? So the very meaning of the word office in that sense has changed. Millions of dispersed beds, you can say, are taking over from concentrated office buildings. The boudoir in that sense is defeating the tower. And the question again, since I'm a historian, I cannot stop myself at asking, how did we get here? And I went back to this famous essay of Walter Benjamin, Louis Philippe, or The Interior, where he reminds us that under Louis Philippe, the private citizen enters the stage of history for the private person. Living space becomes for the first time antithetical to the place of work. The former is constituted by the interior. The office is its complement. From these, of course, it springs the phantasmagorias of the interior. For the private individual, the private environment represents the universe. In it, he gathers remote places and the past. His living room is a box in the wall theater. So industrialization, of course, brought with it the 8-hour shift and the radical separation between the home and the office or the factory, between rest and work, between night and day. And this was also a very traumatic transformation for people living through that period. They used to live on top of where they were working. No? Post-industrialization, in a way, is collapsing work back into the home and taking it further into the bed itself. Phantasmagorias are no longer in the wallpaper, the fabric, the images and the objects, as Benjamin used to talk about, but in the electronic devices. The whole universe is now concentrated on a small screen, with the bed floating in an infinite sea of information. You have this advertisement, for example, collaborate in bed, right? The bed is now, of course, a site of action, and we have become kind of voluntary invalids that do not need or are led. The bed is kind of prosthetic, and a whole new industry is now, if you go into the internet, dedicated to providing all kinds of contraptions to facilitate work while lying down, reading, writing, testing, recording, broadcasting, listening, talking, and of course eating, drinking, sleeping, or making love, activities that seem to have been altered of late into work. I mean, waiters in restaurants ask you if you are still working on that in the United States, right? Everything is work. Endless advice is dispensed today about how to work on your personal relationships, how you have to schedule sex, because otherwise you don't put it in the agenda. Apparently it doesn't happen. Sleeping is definitely hard work for billions, with the psychopharmaceutical industry providing new drugs every year, and an army of sleep experts providing advice on how to achieve this apparently ever more elusive goal, and of course all in the name of productivity. So everything done in bed, even sleep, you have to work on it. Right? This philosophy was, in a way, embodied in the figure of Hugh Hefner, who famously almost never left his bed, let alone his house. He literally moved his office to his bed when he moved into the mansion in Chicago in 1960, turning into the epicenter of a global empire, and he's still pajamas into his new kind of business attire. I don't go out of the house at all. I'm a contemporary recluse, he said to Tom Wolfe, guessing that the last time he had been out of the house had been 3.5 months before. In the last 2 years, he said he had been out of the house only 9 times. Fascinated, Wolfe described him as the tender, timpani, green heart of an artichoke. Here you have him and Tom Wolfe that came to interview him. And of course, even when Hefner went out, he was not really out, but in a succession of bubbles, like all these vehicles, of which the big Bunny jet is perhaps the most fascinating one, a DC-9 that he turns into kind of an extension of his mansion, with gourmet kitchen, a dancing floor, a living room, conference, discotheque, wet bar, state-of-the-art cinematographic projection, sleeping quarters for 16 guests, and Hefner's suite with elliptical bed covered in Tasmanian opossum skins. And here you have him arriving in Heathrow Airport with his then girlfriend Barbie, and of course the home away from home of the Playboy Club. So he doesn't really go out into the sidewalk. He never went to he was completely horrified of it. So he moves from one interior into another interior, the interior of the car, the interior of the plane, the interior of the clubs. Here is he fashioned himself as an architect with the model of the with the pipe and everything like architects. But returning to the bed, Playboy actually turned the bed into a workplace. From the mid-1950s on, the bed becomes increasingly sophisticated, outfitted with all sorts of entertainment and communication devices as a kind of control room. The bed was first introduced as a feature in the Playboy townhouse. This article in Playboy, where he first introduced this townhouse. It was supposed to be his house, but he never passed the landmark commission, so it was not realized. And it's symptomatic that the only piece of that beautiful house, which sounds like a Paul Rudolph, if you want, but it's before Paul Rudolph. That's maybe Paul Rudolph was reading Playboy. You see this round bed that is the only piece that is actually realized in the mansion. The bed itself, you can argue that is a house. It has a rotating and vibrating structure packed with a small fridge, hi-fi, telephone, filing cabinets, several telephones, bar, microphone, dictaphone, video cameras, headphones, TV, breakfast table, work surfaces, and control for all the lighting fixtures in the house for the man, of course, who never wants to live. So you can see here in how much media there is, and this incredible surface. So the bed was, of course, Hefner's office, his place of business, where he conducted all the interviews, made his phone calls, selected images, adjusted layouts, edited tests, ate, drank, and consulted with it's not evident that he had any sex. There is a lot of in this bed, at least. I don't know. But Hefner, of course, was not alone. The bed may have been the ultimate American office of mid-century. In an interview in Paris Review in 1957, Truman Capote is asked, "What are some of your writing habits? Do you use a desk? To which do you write in a typewriter machine?" To which he answers, "I am a completely horizontal author. I cannot even think if I'm not lying down, either in bed or stretched on a couch with a cigarette and a coffee handy." But he's not alone. Again, even you will maybe be surprised that even architects at mid-century set up office in bed, like Neutra, which started work the moment he woke up, and there are not only beds everywhere in his Silver Lake house, but at a certain point he doesn't move from bed, really. His son Dion Neutra at a certain point wrote that best time for creative writing was always early in the morning, long before any activity had started in the office below. He often stayed in bed working with ideas and designs, even extending into appointments that he had made earlier. His one concession to convention was to put on a tie over his pyjamas when receiving visitors or still prop up in bed. So he's still in bed, he puts a tie over his pyjamas, and this is the crazy thing. The Neutra bed in the VDL house in Silver Lake included several phones, 3 communication stations for talking with other rooms in the house, also the office below, and another office that was like a half a kilometer, so cables are going down the street, 3 different call bells, drafting boards and easels that folded down over the bed, electric lights and a radio gramophone control from a dashboard overhead, a bedside table rolling on casters that had the tape recorder, electric clock, and a storage compartment for the drawings and the writing equipment, so that he could, as Neutra put it in a letter to his sister, use every minute from morning to night. So here you have another kind of 24/7 working in bed. So post-war America, in that sense, inaugurated the high-performance bed as the epicenter of productivity, a new form of industrialization, if you want, that was exported globally and has now become available to an international army of dispersed but interconnected producers. A new kind of factory without walls is constructed by compact electronics and extra pillows for the 24/7 generation. The kind of equipment that Hefner envisioned, some of which, like the answering machine, did exist, is now expanded for the internet and social media generation, who not only work in bed, but socialize in bed, exercise in bed, read the news in bed, and entertain sexual relationships with people miles away from them, from their beds. The Playboy fantasy of the nice girl next door is more likely realized today with someone in another continent than in the same building or the same neighborhood. A person you may never have seen before and never see again, and it's anybody's guess whether it's real. This is still physically in some place or time, or is an electronic construction. As with the film Her, a moving depiction of life in the soft, if you want, uterine state that is a corollary to our new mobile technologies. The Her in question is an operating system that turns out to be more satisfying than a partner. The protagonist lies in bed, chatting with her, arguing, making love, and eventually also breaking up in bed. If, according to Jonathan Crary, late capitalism is the end of sleep, colonizing every single minute of our lives for production and consumption, the action of this voluntary recluse are not so voluntary in the end. But I have several problems with this book. I love this book. On the one hand, I think the image in the cover is already an old image, the image of the city that never sleeps, the office tower. But as I say, we are in a completely different situation. Another thing is that he places in the context of capitalism and late capitalism, but the fact is that communism has its own kind of ideas about sleep that may be worth considering. This is actually during the Stalin period, the first 5-year plan in 1929, with the working day extended and mass exhaustion of factory workers in the face of staggering new production quotas. The Soviet government organized a competition for a new city of rest, and Konstantin Menikov presented this sonata of sleep, which is a new building type for collective sleep, with mechanized beds rocking the workers to unconsciousness and slanted floors that eliminate the need for pillows, with centralized booths with sleep attendants that will regulate temperature, humidity, smells, and even sounds to maximize speed. I mean, it's really incredible because the inspiration had been American. He had discovered a military military academy in Florida that was trying to teach languages to sleeping soldiers. So actually sleep, they want to colonize sleep for production. So another thing that I think is important to think about is that actually this question, the 19th century division between the city of rest and work, may soon itself become obsolete, because not only have our habits and habitats changed with the internet and social media, but predictions about the end of human labor in the wake of technologies and robotization that, by the way, were already made, as we mentioned yesterday, at the end of the 19th century, are no longer treated as futuristic. 30 years ago, Basil Leontief basically say that the human worker will go the way of the horse and nobody pay attention to him. But recently, the business section of the New York Times pick it up again and say, quoting Leontief, that horses hang around in the labor force for quite some time after they were first challenged by modern communication technologies, like the telegraph and the railroad, hauling staff and people around farms and cities. But when the internal combustion engine came along, horses as a critical component of the world economy were history. Humans as work horses might also be on the way out. So we are on the way out, obviously, as is demonstrated by many events that have happened in recent time. For example, well, economists in particular, but I think as architects we should also think about that. We are living in 19th century cities. We are living in cities with office towers and housing like if we were still in the Industrial Revolution. Okay, we are in a completely different situation. Economists, of course, are very concerned about this question of the end of human labor and wonder what kind of economic model this reality will lead to, from growing inequalities with vast amount of people unemployed to large redistribution in the form of the universal basic income, which was recently considered in a referendum 2 years ago in Switzerland and rejected. But it's already multiple trials are taking place in many places in Europe and in California, in Finland, and in many ways it's already in operation in several places in Europe. So the end of paid labor and its replacement, the interesting thing is now that it's on upon us, if we are not thinking about it. But if you go back to the 60s, as we discovered, as we talked about yesterday, it turns out that at that time, the end of paid labor and its replacement with some sort of creative leisure was already envisioned in projects by, by Constant, by Superstudio, by Archithum, and they always tended to include these hyper-equipped beds, as if they have anticipated what we now know is happening to us. Experimental architects devoted themselves to the equipment of a new mobile nomad in a whole galaxy of lightweight portable interiors with soft reclining spaces like microwave, cusicle, and suite alone, all these things that I showed you before. All this can be understood as high-performance beds, complete with media, artificial atmospheres. You may have seen this before, the Bathmatic with artificial colors, light, smell, etc. Rainer Bonham wrote about a naked Jane Fonda flying through space in her far-lying horizontal bubble in the same breath that he also enthusiastically embraced Playboy. Of course, I buy it for the giant foldouts, full-color pinups. Playboy's placemates are one of America's greatest gifts to Western art culture, and you know how I go for culture. But if I was a working hypocrite, I could find another dozen reasons for keeping abreast of Playboy. Item, architecture and interior design. I will repeat that to show that I'm not kidding. Architecture and interior design. Which means that already in 1960, Bonham understood that there was a lot of architecture and design in Playboy. Of course, it was a matter of time before Yoko Ono and John Lennon held a weekend bedding for peace in the Amsterdam Hilton Hotel during their honeymoon in March of 1969. Here you are. They are working actually 24/7, not only in the bedding for piece in which they receive visitors from 9 a.m. To 9 p.m. and here is the room from the outside already indicating where they are. But actually they were working very hard also from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. to conceive a child. They got into, and Yoko repeats this, that we are working on conceiving an Amsterdam baby. So they are really working 24/7. The bed in a way is not just their office, but is a factory for a baby, right? So they moved from Montreal to Amsterdam to Montreal. They wanted to do it in New York, but the United States would not give John Lennon a visa because he had been convicted with possession of marijuana, etc., etc. Well, if architects are not thinking, well, I bring all these examples, of course, because I think that the bedding in Montreal or in Amsterdam and all these other examples in a way anticipate the architecture that we are living in today. And while many architects, the majority actually, are not thinking about the present, the world actually in front of our noses, as if sleep actually was not an architectural topic, as if we are not living already in a 24/7. Wouldn't our beds, our rooms, our cities change? Wouldn't the billions of messages that we check in bed ultimately define a new kind of space? And actually, while we are doing very little, the city itself has started to redesign itself. In today's attention deficit disorder, we have discovered that we work better in short bursts. I think it's the revenge of the Spanish siesta. So many companies now say it's very productive for them to have this kind of metro naps where their employees can have a little nap, and they are actually more productive. So sleep becomes part of production, and there are all these kinds of mini space ships that can be used in isolation and gathered together in clusters, like in this airport in Abu Dhabi. Not really for the how do you say that when you're claustrophobic, right? So between the bed inserted in the office and the office inserted in the bed, you can see that a whole new horizontal architecture has taken over. And we may want to ask ourselves, what is the nature of this interior in which we have decided collectively to check ourselves in? What is the architecture of this prison in which night and day, work and play are no longer differentiated and we are permanently under surveillance? New media turns all of us into inmates, constantly under surveillance, even as we celebrate endless connectivity. We all have become contemporary recluses, to use Hugh Hefner's words a half a century or more ago. Let me finish here with the Citizen 4, a film of Laura Poitras, of course, where we see Edward Snowden sitting in bed on a Hong Kong hotel for days on end, surrounded by his laptops, communicating with journalists in the room and around the world about the secret world of massive global surveillance. The biggest invasion of privacy in the history of the planet was revealed from a bed and dominated all media at the time. The most public figure in the world at that moment was and is still a recluse. In that sense, architecture was inverted. Thank you.
Bueno, hola, es en castellano, ¿no? Sí. Y gracias, Beatriz. Gracias, Iván, por la invitación y a la organización. Bueno, para mí es bastante interesante hablar justo después de Beatriz. Digamos, es que cuando quiero decir, supongo que se verán cosas de las cosas que lees, ¿no? en lo que cuentas. Y la concepción de la arquitectura, por ejemplo, en este caso de un espacio de museo, o sea, como un espacio medial y social también, que ahora estamos trabajando precisamente con mi otro compañero de mesa, Andrés. Bueno, creo que si conocéis el museo el 2 de mayo y si venís a verlo ahora, creo que se entiende muy bien que el proceso de transformación arquitectónica que se está produciendo con esta acupuntura que estamos realizando con la oficina tiene mucho que ver precisamente con el contenido que emana de él, ¿no? Con todo lo que sale, digamos, con todo lo que emanamos en redes, con todo lo que producimos como imagen, digamos precisamente eso, como imagen, digamos, entendiendo la arquitectura como un espacio social, entendiendo el proyecto de un museo de arte contemporáneo como parte de una producción de arte contemporáneo de por sí, ¿no? Yo creo que es lo más interesante de lo que os voy a enseñar. Bueno, yo voy a partir de este proyecto del que hablaba Iván antes, precisamente, de Elements of Vogue, que como veis tiene este subtítulo de un caso de estudio de performance radical, digamos, donde utilizamos el voguing, un tipo de baile, digamos, queer, transexual, travesti, afrolatino de Estados Unidos, que nace en los años 30 en la Harlem, bueno, en los años 20 en la Harlem Renaissance y dura hasta la actualidad, digamos, disperso precisamente en todos esos cuerpos diaspóricos que conocemos en digamos, pues, por ejemplo, en París, en Usera y en, yo qué sé, pues Rotterdam, por ejemplo, y entendiendo precisamente, digamos, ese espacio interseccional que eso provoca como un índice que para nosotros sirve como caso de estudio precisamente porque nos explica muy bien qué tiene que ver, digamos, el cuerpo con un museo de hoy, qué tiene que ver el arte contemporáneo, sobre todo, con esas evoluciones, digamos, de un principio de interseccionalidad en donde, bueno, si entendemos el arte contemporáneo como algo que nace como una tradición selectiva que nace en un momento muy concreto de la historia de las ideas, en los años 60, en el que precisamente, pues, digamos, nace la primera oleada de feminismos también en las artes plásticas, en la que, digamos, los últimos procesos de decolonización de la Commonwealth se están produciendo, etcétera, pues, digamos, no es casual que, digamos, entender la raza, el género y la clase social como un proceso espiral
loop process where we have to work in common. This is one of the central aspects because it's addressed to the own individualities, the senses, etc. So I think that one of the main aspects of the building is the color, and in this case I don't think that it is interesting to not to be there because I don't want this. So, in this case, the Office of Political Innovation has decided a very specific color is some kind of blue that is different for every eye. It can be more purple, more green, more blue, more even yellow, even white. And it happens that when you have a negotiable color, for example, and it indicates that your eye, it's not a rational organ because it's the position is different at everybody. So in that way, this indicates not only a queer principle of this fixation, but also we are able to understand that the Contemporary Art Museum is a space where we have our whole body with our own experience. This is not that euphemism of body, of the whole body through the eye that is, for example, the Prado Museum, where the eye replaces the body as an organ that is usually male, heterosexual, of mid-age, and normally of high class, because it has that time to look. So what I'm going to talk about is about this. And to me it's very important to explain the selection of contemporary art that started in the 60s, because when we speak about contemporary art, we can't establish, as I imagine that you all know, a linear and progressive story without progression. That is the one that neoliberalism establishes. But it has to do with gender and social class. For example, Me Too and the feminist fight of the 20s, apart from the fact that they were asking for some specific aspects, it's the same fight as regards the social non-progression, so to speak. It's an eternal criticism, so to speak. In contemporary art, when we speak about history, we have to speak about body. I think that in general, but in terms of contemporary art, something very obvious. It's a serigraphic instrument, is the main tool, And we can understand the past as something that has an influence over the future, or the future like something that is having an influence over during the present. So something as silly as trying to get thinner is something that has an influence in the present. It's a stupid example that is very useful to understand this. What the exhibition tries to look at is to those radical gestures that restructure from something that looks like an anecdote, that restructure this space, this historiography of bodies. I think this Vogers doing a death lop can let us understand something, but maybe you're more familiar with this, and this is more obvious. So this performativity of the black body, black body appears. I mean, the black body of these athletes is not black until they put their hand up during the Olympics. It's not very difficult to understand, but when we speak about museums, well, speaking about social media, it's very interesting to understand what's the space of these black bodies in museums. So I don't understand living people that have seen so close to the Joconde as Beyoncé and Jay-Z, and Beyoncé is wearing that T-shirt. That is the Black Nation's flag. It's not the conventional U.S. flag. So they curated the roof, the most beautiful part of the Louvre, so to speak, but they did this type of things. This is the selfie goddess reinterpreted, but the absolute love of the absolute white of Karova, and you can see what's happening there. They mimic it, and they give the ownership of it. They're not only getting this Western tradition, but there's something happening that goes further, and it has to do with the cultural ownership of black bodies. If I think of the processes that the curators of contemporary art, or the curator's task as something in fashion, etc. Every time that I teach somewhere, everybody wants to be a curator. So what happens? If you think of the processes of the curator processes and of their physicity, of their bodiness, so to speak, where the only way of being politics is to establish them again here with a specific voice, a specific body. If you think of this, and you think of the fact that they are getting the ownership of it, turning around and think of the 80s and the moment when the fact of being black developed a pollution process, so to speak, that leads to many contemporary cultural processes. For example, Bivolper, so to speak, voguing as the ownership of gestures, karate, I don't know, almost all curator processes come from black culture and have their origin in a Afro-American black culture. And this is very interesting as a basis to get away from their Swiss origins during the 90s and take it back to this origin with the proliferation of the selection, gesture, and ownership and reincorporation to build another tale. Well, these gestures can be ordered differently, has a genealogy that makes normal that we give these bodies back to the museum in a natural way. So we could speak about the Trevor Martin's jumper that was murdered in 2010, and the mother of whom in 2013 was exonerated from his trial, a popular trial, where I think that something very interesting is to understand that the level of complexity is high, but the reaction has always been complex. So in that moment, 2013, Black Lives Matter was born as a hashtag and as a movement, and it's the first of all these activist movements, Afro-American descendant, so to speak, where the intersectionality has been the basis. If you log into the website, you'll see that feminism and queer theory are the genealogy basis, even before speaking about ethnicity. So this exhibition is a project that, well, it's a statement of what we understand of what a art contemporary museum should be. And if we're working on something from the US, it's because this distance lets us make a bridge to a discussion bridge. And what we need is to start to take it to our interior body. So the axis is this. Sorry. Well, this is a Glenn Ligon work. It's from year 2000. In the 2018 Trump's America, I think that is even more tremendous. It's called Condition Report. It is what we do when we receive a piece of work in the museum. Someone lends me this. I have to analyze this, and if it has this paperwork or this paper mark, it has to have it, because otherwise I would have to pay the insurance or whatever. So in this case, someone asked to a preservator to analyze the conditions of this piece, and I don't have to explain where the metaphor comes from, of this day where the sweepers in Memphis were protesting for earning 8 times more of what they earned. So that day, Martin Luther King came to give support to this demonstration, and that night he was killed in Memphis. So this status, condition status, is very important. So if you could put the video, please. What you can see on the left is an irony. As regards, well, I'm a man. It's not a man, as you can see.
Solo para hablar, no me lo quites, por favor.
This is David Kahn. He's a voguer in London, and he interrupted a demonstration, biggest demonstration after the murder in the Palace discotheque. It was a sign of repudiation, and he started to dance, and so this was interrupted. They considered it too much of a white demonstration, so he started to dance to show that if these bodies had been murdered, it's because they were dancing. And this interest is suddenly in understanding literally the gesture, the voguing, these radical movements, these spiral movements have to do with a public space, occupying a public space, which allows other things to be constructed there. So I'm interested in certain brands, certain identities, when there's no progression here. There are spiral or circular movements, and we can see that here in the image, in the photograph. This is Bow of the Ball from 1926, Harlem, New York. Here there was an investigation where there was a monthly dance with 6,000 transvestites, something that you wouldn't even get in Chueca nowadays. So this is the type of dance that they did in these fairy balls, with a round way and a dag walk. There are lots of elements of Vogue that we bring out in the exhibition. So there, Marsha P. Johnson, this lady, it was the patron saint, as it were, of bisexuality, and she threw a brick against to the policeman, threw the brick at the discotheque and caused the beginning of a huge movement. So she wanted to express that she was happy with her homosexuality. This is a demonstration that went right through New York and caused a huge impact. So when we read the story from this point of view, and we look back and we break down all the elements, the canons, the typical attitudes or of what is male, what is female. We have Damon Hammonds in his performance doing body prints. This breaks down a classic sort of story, classic conception of what is male and female, leaving his prints, his body prints on the paper. We have this typical idea of the white body, the white concept of beauty that needs to be broken down. Then the ephemeral gardens we see here in this picture, the Rasta images. So this is an ephemeral image it's the cotton plantations, which were worked by the blacks and of course belonged to the whites. So what I was more interested in, more than contemporary art, the part that we read, was the presidential campaign of Jean Jet Black in 1992, which was the toughest time of AIDS, competing for the Democratic Party, supported by the Catholic nuns of San Francisco, free Social Security for all Americans. This was one of the main points. So this is imitation of Whitney Houston's famous picture, very similar image. So, simply to finish, before I show you the final video, which has to do with the social media, etc. And this is what we put out, what we talk about social media, people say, oh yes, I saw it on Instagram, I saw this, I saw that. This is a teaser from for our exhibition. Let's see if we can go on to the image. Oh, perhaps somebody's changing it backstage. Ah, yes, here we are. Okay. Right. Okay. So this is the space where we have the ball. Interesting to see it because it's possible thanks to the fact that we are in the first stages of acupuncture. We created a sort of the building. We created a very large, open, indelible space to be able to have a location to work with the idea of bodies in museums in a unusual way. The voguing has to happen. Those bodies have to come through. And why does this have to happen? Because we're thinking about what you were saying today. Was understanding a basic notion. We have a small school that we work in all year. We're thinking about this subject for about 7 months. And those who know a lot about the history of art will know that people have always talked about what was coded in plastic arts and cults was pre-coded before in dance. So what we see in dance was designed before in sculpture or painting or whatever. So all these gestures coded first through dance and then represented in a physical form and have an effect on what is real, this like Beyonce image. This enables us to talk about something very interesting. When this happens to a group, we have this kind of social choreography. So it's invented as a kind of a cultural graphics. So it's if the three of us started to have physical reactions to somebody speaking, we could make a kind of pattern, which would be psychosomatic, where we when you listen to a presentation, you don't perhaps agree with it, you sort of sit up straight or you cross your arms, you look tense. It's your bodily expression of your disagreement. So in the world of aesthetics and the representation, we can create social forms. The effect of group dancing in a particular way is makes a particular group experience something in a different way. So I think if you can put the video on, please, and then I'll keep silent as the video is on. Nothing to... Hey, hey, yee-ho, etc. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. That was really quite stunning. Just one thing while we're moving computers and moving around, can I just tell you that lunch break we'll be doing at 1:30. So don't worry if we're a little bit delayed. You'll have opportunities for questions and debate. So also we'll say hello to Eloy, who's joined us on the panel.
Invitarme a todos.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to talk about social media as a new concept, as an interstellar idea. Very often we see each other, we don't imagine what we're like, and this is the last... Oops, what's happened to my image? Okay, this is the last project that we presented, Sex and the So-Called City. It's a reenactment of the series Sex and the City that you probably all know about, down Star in the 90s, and it's 20 years old now. But our version is Sex and the So-Called City. I don't know if we can hear it very well. I'll start. The first sentence is really great. So Samantha has two great loves, real estate and sex. So finally she could join them two together in New York. So Sex and the City has anticipated a lot of the major transformations that have taken place in the last years in New York, almost like a project of a of New York itself, delirious New York of today. So what's interesting is many of these transformations that were announced, well, it started off as a very sweet idea, not very critical, but we really see that in New York of 1998, when this series began, they looked like this. 20 years later, this is what they look like. And it's not just the gold, it's not the elimination of these styles of the second-hand clothes and the apartments were a bit not too great looking, a bit shabby, and we have this goldy look here. So you can, the characters here. This has to do with the transformation of gayness in New York in these years. So New York has become, like London, a kind of arena where there's a constant protest because of the disappearance of the country's burning. Hell's Kitchen was transformed and into a building of luxury apartments, etc. So it's a kind of institution, this nightlife, all this atmosphere, all this context that Manuel had talked about, and it's been changed for something completely different, which is, here we go, we'll just switch this off now. This is a different context of apartments, of high-end living, very elegant places where there's a lot of money being stored and saved up there, and impressive part of New York. We see the offshore world. For many theorists, is the transformation of from the offshore economy to onshore, where you can avoid paying taxes and have lots of secret investments onshore too. So this took up 3 years of research with Grindr, with his data and the offices in West Hollywood. What's interesting is that these locations where precisely these luxury apartments and the towers appear, the locations which are most preferred by Grindr are places that people travel to. They turn their app on to be able to perhaps get to know or get intimate with one of the people who lives in these rich blocks. So this is all about realizing how the social media have gone through a huge transformation. Initially, it was a place for emancipation, and suddenly they've become a lifestyle setting, a market, a mechanism, or a space for sale. So this is something that Grindr has been very extreme on. It began as a marginal space. People were embarrassed about being there. It became a prestigious place where J.W. Anderson broadcast his catwalks, his fashion parades, etc. And the last, so Grindr, before selling this building to a Chinese casino, the orange color was eliminated from the interface. And why was this removed? It was because if people were looking at Grindr, like Manuel's looking at me now, this orange color would give them away. So the proposition of Grindr was something that had a major effect in the design of interface. So what I thought was interesting is that this project of Sex and the City, the television series, is a document which has shown how certain references have gone, that the cities have changed, and the globalized cities have changed incredibly in the last 20 years. So what are they looking at? What is making them all look golden? What's this golden hue that you see in the picture? You'd think that in that gallery there was enough gold already. Well, this is a reflection of the gold of that building, 492. It was the true architects of this building are not Raphael Bignol and Deborah Bird, who did the interiors. It's D-Box. The tradition, the work of Beatriz, and some of them actually studied in Princeton with Beatriz. So they have become some of the great pornographers, as it were, of architecture. We see this in New Year magazine. This is what they said 4 years ago, that it's become one of the most outlandish of the arts, and D-Box is one of the great pornographers of this. But this is not a job that D-Box did alone. Bloomberg, this series 6, as they started 3 years before Bloomberg became the mayor of New York, and he became famous through this mandate. If we manage to attract as many millionaires as possible, this will be a gift of God for the city, if we can bring in all these. This was translated itself into a series of policies, of possibility of in New York, of anonymous cities, anonymous identities, anonymous people buying up huge buildings. It was impossible to know exactly who was at the end of this chain, who was paying for the construction. 77% of the condos were owned by shell companies, but nobody knew this. So the 157 had been bought through companies that hid their identities. So this was no longer offshore, it's onshore but concealed. So we don't know. There's a kind of overlapping system of wealth where there are so many layers that nobody knows who's at the end of it. So also this building 442, the legislation in New York allowed tax breaks for millionaires, which is incomprehensible in a tradition of welfare. But yes, billionaires don't pay property taxes, as it says here in the picture. So this is one of the most famous render buildings, Matthew Bannister in B-Box. So as you can see, when we had interviewed him, the last interview we did several over a number of years. We're looking at his constructions of 360 degrees. He decided to put himself in the window. It's a false window that reduces the window of 492 because it's a building which puts bodies in windows. And this is a magazine produced by D-Box to announce the apartments, and there were very few examples of this, fewer than 500, and they were placed in the suites of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow. So they were on the bed table, as it were, so that at night time the billionaires could have a look through them and put their hand over this body at the window, this image. So this photo was extremely expensive. It was taken in Brooklyn studios. We have this beautiful woman, this model, and the rest is all a digital reproduction. We can see this comes from a very specific tradition from New York, where that also had to do with Sex in the City. It was by cocky boys, but by typical specific type of pornography that appeared in 2000 in New York. So they had perhaps taken the tradition of cinema and VHS, etc., and the Valley of San Fernando in California could be. There were technicians saying goodbye, and they were doing porno programs which were very cheap in 2000 with the rise of this type of economy and these fantastic views that we saw in cocky boys began to create a specific kind of pornography presented by D-Box. And here we have an image, a picture of this type. And here we have Cookie Boys again. This is a studio in Hunters Point, Brooklyn. Jake Jackson and J.R. Sebastian. He's the photographer. Previously a dancer, most of the models of Cookie Boys, and he placed the models in sex scenes in front of the windows or at the windows so that the latitude of the film could show us the background, the window, and the sign in the foreground. The scene of sex in the foreground. So this project coincided with another project very related to Snowden, which is the work of Greenwald with Llewellyn Poitras, revealing through the Guardian and all the Federation of Associations of International Newspapers the secrets of the United States. So what Glenn Greenwald and Jake Jackson, the owner of Cookie Boys, were partners in 2000. In 2001, they bought a porno studio, which is very ramshackle, hairy jobs. Through Glenn Greenwald and Jane Jackson had a marketing company in internet, and they proposed to link streets together. This was their project. So when they started to use techniques to capture customers on this channel, Hairy Jobs, the sales started to rocket, and they decided instead of concentrating on marketing, they would concentrate on porno and formed Cookie Boys. For Jake Jackson, this was a political project because he came from a very Catholic, very Batista family in New Orleans, and this idea of placing these bodies with having sex, it was a way of transparency that would create a liberation, freedom for everyone, for society, a vibration of which reflected all these moral judgments that were going on at the time. So precisely through the Snowden papers, this was the moment when Jake Jackson actually admitted his homosexuality. He came out of the closet. So it was said his partner was Jake Jackson and his pornographic adventures. He had not told anyone in New Orleans that he was gay, and then suddenly he was at the window. And these are scenes, porno scenes by Cookie Boys in front of the window. This is a Spanish actor, Alan Kind, who is one of the exclusive models of Cookie Boys right now. These are the images that come from the rendering job. So, in fact, this 492, you can see a bath in front of the window. So somebody's studying Cookie Boys there. This is a very interesting scene. The reference to Kim Kardashian is obvious, but Kim Kardashian has this shirtless suit, Lanvin. The Devox version is Armani, making it much more respectable, as it were. Mayakovsky, the model. There were 400 people participating in the casting. She is a model of Sport Illustrator. The calendars, she's on the swimwear calendars. She has facial characteristics that have been that are considered very seductive, particularly for the Asian public and for European public, and also public from the Middle East. So this ensemble of features with particular makeup. If you know this model, she doesn't look so much like that. She's been transformed quite a lot. It has to do with global look. These are all actors except one, this man here, who you can see, who is in D-Box they call him Danny the Beto guy. He's not an actor, he's a businessman. He's from New Jersey, a friend of the president, and D-Box, and he can make this credible that for a man, an older man, or for a older woman looking at the pages of the magazine, the Ritz-Carlton, could actually pass their hands over this beautiful body and buy this apartment in this fantastic setting that and perhaps in the end have sex at the window like her.
Pero no solamente es esto, la transformación.
But it's not only this. Transformation of all this global transformation, this onsorization of secret economy goes through the transformation of the sky. These are the renders where, they've paid attention to the sky again. This is the image series that DevOps produced, the filter of the sky, how to filter the sky. This is a DevOps image to sell the apartments. But this doesn't only belong to the online world or to the image circulation, it belongs to the architecture details. As Mark was saying, speaking about materiality, interactions of cell phones, there's a very specific materiality that takes place in architecture, a connection between these pictures and materiality of glasses of 432. The most expensive building element of 432 are these XL Austrian glasses that have the characteristic of polarizing the color of the sky and intensifying the blue tone that you can see through them. This coordination between pornography, sexualization of media images, the putting magazines in Ritz-Carlton hotel, the production of sky images filtered through the building, and the coordination with the material building of the building doesn't end there. And here's what Bloomberg comes along again. In 2012, Bloomberg approved the Clean Heat Act for New York, a program that had $20 million of budget, but they transformed the energy source of 80% of New York that moved from oil to be fed with natural gas. So the interesting thing, it had an immediate effect over the sulfur nitrates suspended in the air that were the ones that were removing the blue color from the sky. And many other particles, suspended particles or gases, were maybe more painful than these nitrates. The ones that were mainly removed were the ones that removed the blue color from the sky. But 1 year after, this is the curious thing of everything, when New York started to consume natural gas and the curve of natural gas consumption was running up, some years after, they forbid fracking in New York, that up to then was a fracking production center. They stopped producing gas natural by fracking procedures. So where did all this pollution go? Where all this gas extraction go? Where all these atmosphere processes go? Well, they went to Susquehanna Valley, where they started to build burners to deal with the trash from New York, and they started to take water for fracking mass consumption. In 2 years, Susquehanna Valley was forbidding 60% of natural gas that was being produced in New York. I think he said he was producing, not forbidding. So this is the way of representing the Marcellus shale, this great natural gas bank that can be exploited by these techniques. And this is the way how we can understand it on the surface. And these are the collaboration drawings that have been done by different activist groups in Susquehanna to map the proliferation of drills for gas extraction. This is how you usually see fracking in rural areas, but this is how you see it from at land level. Because fracking leads to a landscape design where the drills are far away from roads, where you use trees to hide the position of all these platforms. In fact, there's a fracking pad here, but it is hidden and you can only see it at distance. But this is how it is present at many people's houses. As you know, fracking drills up to a depth that can be up to, well, depending on what technology you use, up to 10 miles or even more. After that, this pipe rotates, and after 20 miles drilling and producing a microfragmentation of a sector around this pipe, lets the gas flow. The gas that is isolated in small cells of stones, and the gas flows through the same pipe upwards. But at this process, they drill some water deposits that are drilled because of the gas. And as they use drills for water supply, this water is mixed with different gases that can be flammable. The interesting thing is that people that live at the surface perceive as an esoteric phenomenon, as a paranormal phenomenon with a reality that is underneath them, and they're unable to see it. They perceive it as an esoteric effect. There's another sector that has developed a cutting-edge technology to map the fracking. These are 4D information consolidation drawings through a COBIX technology that Digital Graphics patented some years ago. And it is a super exclusive software that only oil companies buy or end up buying. And it enables the consolidation of the mining, the mineral sector, sorry. This is a fragmentation on the top layer, and all these small spots are parcels that have been bought. This is the top layer and the bottom layer. To me, what's interesting is that in reality, this has become into a social network during this last year. This possibility of consolidating these mineral assets as investment spaces has gone through a new stage thanks to the collaboration of General Electric with Baker Hughes and the development of the Predix technology that at this moment, through asset performance management, has become into a social network used by very few people, very few humans, but it is massively used by all the sensors that are placed in the extraction headings, by all technology, intermediate technologies that make fracking possible, that reach all these under layer points where your eyes would never reach. This is another social network that is used by robots, by pipes, by tubes, and that has mobilized all these mineral assets as an exclusive property that is brought by the offshore economy to the onshore economy but to a very exclusive onshore that can only be accessible for people, for a specific group of people. These are the two visions that I'm interested in. So how the world of billionaires has the possibility of having a pragmatic relationship with these assets, but the people that live on the top layer have almost magical relationship. Something that happens with Sarah Jessica Parker and her subrogation. These two worlds, based on a decoupling of technologies of the places where they operate, have come through in vitro fertilization combined with another social network lookalike that lets you choose the sexual cells of potential donors in subrogation processes through how the donors look like other celebrities, like for example James Franco or Jin Jin-hee, or for example as Christina McCoskey, have been designed to be nice to different audiences. This is a place where this happens. It is in New York, in the 432, at a building of luxury apartments. Time Warner, with 77% of the people have been, or 77% of the apartments have been bought by exclusive societies, and where eventually we can see that the COBITS technology that is used to make this fracking world visible is the same that is used in 4D platforms to make the generation, to make visible the generation of this social network. These two worlds, this technological synchronization, divergences world, is the world that some social media are making possible right now.
Buenas tardes. Bueno, no, días todavía.
Good morning. Or the sharing imperative, or the big other is my title. Thanks to Ivan, because of his generosity, is just comparable to his intelligence and to the foundation that opens its source for me in less than 1 year. Maybe they have a safety issue or something like that, and I'm delighted to be here with Manolo, with Beatriz, and Andres. I hadn't met Beatriz, well, but I've read her texts, and I've been at the rebuilding of the Playboy room that she has shown, and I don't know where it is now, but she was at 1,000 square meters exhibition in that facility, so I liked it a lot. The third time that I saw, I wanted to live there because I thought that it was what I had to do. I had my bag and some chocolates, but people didn't let me live there. You can't stay here because you're not a Playboy. You're a Playmobil clique as much as in that case. So in the Boris Groys text that created all this discussion in terms of self-design, you try to self-design yourself, but you don't catch up sometimes with your environment or as you've said some minutes ago. So that's it. Well, Fundación Telefónica is great to discuss about superhumanity and outer design, because I've always had the feeling that we were speaking about Superman rather than pedestrians, and I love this image of Alfonso XIII in the original building in the 1st of January 1930. I will speak about 1930 sometimes. It's the beginning of some things that affect us because of the inauguration. He was seeing the landscape with his eye, with his royal eye, and he was listening to the first transatlantic call to the President of the United States. There's no recording, but we can imagine it. Hello, Mr. President. The skyscraper tone, the real omnivoyeurism that has to do with the specialists in pornography. He was the one who originated the gender in Spain, but after 14 months he had to abdicate. His last words were really honest. His image is compared to, let me see, yes, with this collage of Maria Loboda that evokes the loss. You imagine lost Madrid, the anachronical landscape. This that I have in front of me does not belong to me. And it takes me wonder how we share the power once the king has lost it. He has had to abdicate. And my answer has to do with a democracy, but not with republicanism, but with other type of power that I will call, if you let me, diffuse juridism. This is a group of opinions that have to do with the other's appearances, with the other's body and their souls. So this extends, there's no digital head of state, but the roles are shared so that we can all participate of the other's exam as the accused of of bad design. You didn't do a good design because you haven't been able of becoming yourself as a digital subject. So more DAs than lawyers in that trial, more haters and more haters and trolls, more critics and more shares that skills exchange, accumulation of evidences against the accused. To speak badly about the other people creates links and likes and links, as Martín Casariego said, that are more solid than celebrating their accomplishments. So with the information, the new things, and this, we share the ad hominem argument because we have all become the judge, so to speak. And I'm using this in capital letters to give more relevance to it. So the second section is called novelty forces, so to speak. Nobility forces, so to speak. Well, this was the beginning of self-design that was published in Iflux, and I visited the current exhibition that speaks about the author over which the Agrodisian idea is built, exposing some of the pieces that have been mentioned during the rehearsal, in the essay, sorry. Especially this one. Well, this is a recreation of the sleeping room that was created by Loss for his wife. So this is called Out of Loss Private Spaces. Its publication has Beatriz text from Beatriz, and it can be seen at the Design Museum. I tried to see this sample as humanly as possible, and I had the chance of seeing this reproduction of the sleeping room for Lisa. This is how his wife was called. It's the only image that is reproduced in this article, in this original article, and we had a look at it. It creates a scenography of present men and women looking at a well-being idea that comes from more or less 1 century ago. But with the well-being, there was something even more powerful. Self-design and obligation. Among the two terms that are always proposed by Groys, and self-design has called the attention more than the other. Well, the first term was more important to me, obligation. With the illumination source that Grox used to work, there's a suspended white balloon hanging from a chain from the 30s. He didn't work without artificial light, as he would say from himself some years later. And this great balloon it has the white sclera, and it had a metal chain that won't be necessary to hold such a light sphere. So the ornaments fail a little bit, but as we are all loose supporters, we won't take it into account, as he would do in October. We have get rid from the useless ornaments. So this is what he said. This lamp is different compared to others that are clearly ornamental, in some way criminal, so to speak, although there are no very important offenses. The balloon was controlling me. We are not catching up with the objects that surround us. I'm speaking about this table, the rest of the objects. We don't catch up with this balloon. He highlighted this because all the presence of mirrors. I don't like that the exhibition there are mirrors. I have one at home, and I don't go to the museums to see if my hair is correct, but when I am at the exhibition room, I participate of this. I've understood that I don't need to have a mirror at a piece of work, a piece of art. These mirrors had wood framework. The first of all is from 1906, and the second one was made 9 years later with the title Psyche, the psychological thing. The psychic thing. And I'm convinced that a lot of phenomena that we speak about, the social media, etc., things that we fight against have a social fit, not geographical, because the physical things overlap with virtual things, as Andres has explained, but there's something psychological, some feelings that are more powerful than social aspects, and generally in my books I tend to sociological rather than psychoanalytical things, but my approach to these topics forced me to have a bias towards to lay down on that coach, so to speak. The human body is one object that can't give more from itself, no matter how many times we redesign it. I could be extrapolating, that's true, but we can see the only thing that does not fit with the ornamental theory from Laws. This forces us to reconsider the self-design and the ornaments that you wear or not wear, and even the minimal aspects as the supposed 0 degree of design. A theory, well, it's a very extended idea, rather than a praxis, is a poetry. It's a part of the Law's work, and it is refuted there through another lamp with different leaves, metal leaves. It's Art Nouveau terrible. It was terrible. It was Art Nouveau, but it was horrible. And there was something from mahogany. It was called shelf with columns, and I think that it's not practical at all. It doesn't have any function. I prefer to describe it instead of showing it, because it's a very, very, very big thing. Where can I put this? It's the fucking center of your sleeping room. It's divided in 7 sections, each of which has doors. So you are here and you say, well, this book, where can I put it? In the front row or in the back row of this type of dorical column that we can see the central area? Maybe we could pile these books, or where do I have this? Because there is no label to know where the books are. If Cinema Grid would have done that, it's a self-proclaim that does not fulfill the function that it is aimed at. So it's a reflection about the difficulties of storing knowledge and dividing it into sections, the encyclopedia, order, etc. And this takes us, in the third section is called the psychoanalytical foundations. This takes us to what takes place in the self-design and in this decision of sharing. Share in an imperative way. It is an obligation. The Grotian design has a foundation in psychoanalytical theory. The substrate is not explicit in using technical vocabulary, but in other resources that have to do with his way of writing. I'm mentioning some of them. First of all, the reference is dark, invisible reference is the great suspect, in line with the Freudian literature. His renewed versions of the suspect school, the analysis of mediatic things, it's almost a divan aspect. Rather than speaking about diaries or media, he uses a quasi-philosophical category, the medial thing and medial things, and he psychoanalyzes them. The preference for topics that can't be embraced as totalitarianism in the internet, something, well, all these topics, all the absolute topics that are so expensive to psychoanalytical literature. We're speaking about the mother as something from the ocean, something that has no limits, something that we can't escape from. Totalitarianism, I was saying, and the description of the experience under the Soviet regime without forgetting his Stalin portrait, that is just an aesthetic modality of the clinical story. The volume of the text appeared that could have been called, as any of the 9 articles that were included, published in Efflux, is not called the weak universalism, that is maybe the most, that has the most important influence, and it's not called internet phenomenology. Some titles that maybe these would be the best titles, but its title is going public. So when you have to make that step to acquire a digital identity to appear, the network is understood as a decision, that step from the imaginary to the real world that was described by Freud in the translation to go public. Well, maybe you're losing that nuance. So maybe this movement is not so dramatic. So I'm going to specify this. You should be the big other. This is the title of the section. Here I propose an exercise. It's quite easy. A urban exercise. It can be done at any city. Maybe it fits for Madrid. You go to a sex shop, but not to a modern sex shop with toys, last generation toys, no, one of the old sex shops, the one that still have booths and handkerchiefs, and stand 2 steps away from the access to the entry door. Not at the door. When a customer gets out, look into his eyes. Don't tell him anything. And you shouldn't reproach anything with your eyes. And don't smile, just look at him. Maybe he will look down, and in that moment in time, you have become, for the customer, and thanks to the magical virtues of the vision in the big other, the eye that sees everything, that knows everything, that knows what you've just done in that booth with that tissue, that knows, that judges, and that is not merciful. So this is a position in where the subject is on the internet in relationship with all the voices that appear and that configure that observed relationship by the big other that is out of the internet. As regards design, this role has been played by the referees of elegance that conform a huge regulation tradition that are gods of image, but are also time gods. Because as John Moray said about the rigid dressing codes that he uses at their performances, where he uses different Gareth Pook things in a very sublimated way, but they are inspired in this design line. He told me that designer should always anticipate to the presentation of the collections and to live 1 year ahead of the clothes. The collection that is being shown at the Madrid Fashion Week was finished in February last year, and he's almost finishing the 2019 draws. So everything that he's seeing at the catwalk is already finished, is dead. It has to do with Leopardi, a text about fashion and death. So this old fashion. So the image referees. Well, this tradition comes from the end of the 18th century with Dandism by Bob Rumel, and it comes to fashion dictators like, for example, Anne Wintour, the director of Vogue. Out of the fashion world, Wintour was famous. No, she was very famous, of course, but she was even more famous because of the film with Meryl Streep. It was a fashion designer that became a human being. This is a science fiction movie, of course. Sometimes we confuse it with a romantic comedy. This usually happens. Wintour, what you can see on the film, the movie, has a very bad humor, and she creates a totalitarian environment at the newsroom because she does not share anything. She's not open to suggestions. She only gives certificates of aesthetic property. You're not well designed. You're well designed. You're not, etc. And this, that in the movie could seem an overstatement because of a coincidence, it doesn't catch up. I mean, 7 years ago, I had a student that lived a similar role than the one that is played by Meryl Streep. That's very well, okay, but that's not the picture that I want to show. So in the movie, this is an intern that has just arrived to Vogue. She doesn't know anything about fashion. You can see the jumper that she's wearing. So in 2008, I had a student that had lived this. She had worked in Vogue as an intern for 5 months, and she had lived a similar situation, and she says that the movie falls short. So she confirmed that there was a code of looking into the other's eyes. This is what is called avoiding eye contact, that doesn't have a translation into Spanish, because we don't do that. Yes, the employees couldn't look into her eyes. So when they reached to they were at the newsroom, and Winter was waiting to the lift, and you had to wait to the next one. You couldn't share the lift with the manager. You didn't have that right. So she explained that story in the classroom, and it was impressive. So this Euridism, this absolutist Euridism, that it is shared on the internet. They don't give sweets, like, for example, at different parties. No, we are sharing that we are sharing our opinions. Who doesn't want to watch the movie? This the scene is interesting, and we could shoot it, but I think that it was better to represent it in English. I'm going to play it in English because Beatriz has talked in English. So it's a scene that has to do with, well, it's another topic that has been tackled, the blue, the different degrees of blue, how it is spread it over in the policy economy. And the scene starts with this character, that has just asked about how Gabbana is spelled. She finds herself in a think tank, and they are trying to decide what belt that look exactly the same, but they consider that they are absolutely different, they have to wear. So the one that have this jumper, that blue jumper, jiggles a little bit, and she says, "What the hell are you laughing at?" No, well, this stuff. I'll have to get accustomed to this stuff. And it is when Meryl Streep plays that role, I'm going to try to play it. And I'm going to face this intern. I love the region of Madrid, but that's not the image. This is what self-design has. You never catch up with the technical media that you have.
Pues realmente no me sale. ¿Habría manera de recuperar el...?
Could we recover the presentation? Yes, okay, thank you. Sorry for being a little bit clumsy. Okay, there it is. So, the scene, well, it's an argument, and it's a lesson of economy policy focused on a color that is blue.
Okay, I see. So you think this has nothing to do with you? You go to a closet and select this lumpy sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that sweater, it's not just blue, it's not even turquoise, it's actually cerulean. And you're blindly oblivious that in 2002 Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. Then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed in cerulean military jackets. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers, then filtered down to department stores and into some tragic corner thrift shop where you no doubt fished it out from some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars in countless jobs, and it's sort of comical how you think you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry, when in fact you are wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff. Creo que está bastante claro, gracias.
I think it's quite clear. I don't know if you have to shoo at me, but well, it's as blue is predominant in this table. I've tried to perform to perform it, and this voice of the big other that tells how you have to do it, and he's not doing it correctly because this constitution fracture is important. Another example can be seen in Black Friday, for example, when something of top level costs the same that an advertising t-shirt. Sometimes people feel guilty of it. When someone said in front of a camera, said, well, it's okay to have sales, but that Lagerfeld has made a cheaper design is a little bit, it's a pity that everybody can buy a Lagerfeld. She, observing herself from this perspective, I buy it because I don't deserve it. So it's a process that wouldn't have and this takes us to the last section that is called Question Me, the Big Other. As a digital subject, when I self-design myself, I claim for the presence of these annoying tours of the trolls, of the judges, in order to make my image, because I know that these critics, that these remarks are a matter of concern, but I know that otherwise I would not exist if I'm not publicly judged. The subject is fragmentation between the accused and the DA. So I observe myself from the superhuman perspective in order to share rather than to contemplate. The aesthetical quality is not defined by the capacity of the photographer to define it, but because of its skills to make the spectator imagine it with his own perceptions, and he contributes to invent it. So he's involved on it, and I'm sure that this will be discussed later on. This is what he is doing. When the ego was lost in the cloud, I can see some ego on the web, but was a super ego, is that obligation sense and the presence feeling. So, and I'm finishing right now. So, we don't find the key of superhumanity in the ego concept, but in this other passage of psychoanalytical literature, and the big other, well, through the big other, we can transmit the criteria that every day set the subject profile, objections, rumors, etc., and critics, of course. I'm criticized. People spread fake ideas about me. This is the self-consciousness action that we use to define the digital person, and this is what we share and that we exchange. So what a drama, my friends, what a tragedy. Like Orestes followed, well, he's now quoting a passage of the Aeneid. But what visions do you have? Because Coriseo doesn't see. He doesn't see the followers. And Orestes always said, you don't see them, I do see them. So, you should have, I mean, if you try to create a digital identity and you don't have all those haters, you wouldn't be anybody. So, clarity is defined as a social hyper-consciousness, susceptibility. Are you susceptible enough? So, the internet is exposed, and everything is so to speak, the target that you have to shoot at. So the digital format is not Facebook, it's not Twitter, and it's not the post photo, so to speak. The mother of all metamedia, all the places from where we share. It was, I think, maybe you can recall it. It was a metamedia that was called Formspring. When being subdued to the interrogation format to open the space to the question, rather monetary than curious, more physical than appreciative, the digital subject was the subalternate of the big other, the questions, the voices that made captious questions, like happened in Blade Runner, were unified in just one character, one mental character, that is the one that knows everything, a collective and spectral character that is a triple movement that is invoked, an aggregated movement, and invented movement. Well, this is the sentence that was used to describe the interpolation actions by Luis Althusser, where he imagined a scene, and he instituted it as a subaltern, but this was self-sufficient subject that didn't want to be importunated, that didn't want to be questioned. This is not a circumstance to the digital regime where the subject wants to be questioned, and he imagines the internauts as if they were the cops. In fact, well, this happens, but tweeters are like police, and it develops a portrait of itself. So the subject went to the exam, so I'm about to finish. So question me, big other. This is the sentence with which we sought to constitute that demand, the paradox from which we have the digital subject. Something will present an objection. You will say, but this closed, I mean, I'm not saying that this is current. Offspring closed in 2013 to become into something that is called Spring Tony, and the format was obsolete. But not because the procedure was not interesting anymore, but just the other way around, because it died of success. It died of success because the interrogation process was too relevant to be restricted just to one means, was extended to the other formats for springing at them, including in every profile a questionnaire, a Gaussian, and etc. of different surveys, becoming the communication action of the network. as far as asking is communication. It's the same fate that was followed by Photolog that disappeared as a limited format when other formats succeeded. So it had to be extended to everywhere in the net. And this is the last idea that I want to share with you. The net success causes more casualties than fail. Thank you.
Bueno, abrimos a preguntas. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Is there any question?
Pues yo sí tengo una pregunta.
I have a question. It will be very brief and we'll go to have lunch. One of the questions that has called my attention in the 4 presentations was about the future from visions that don't have to do with a utopia or dystopia, but from the point of view of chances in the present, or how the future is redesigned in order to fit. Everything was not adequate, so to speak. This is based on queer positionings, as Manuel was saying, the space where we generate that difference, or the different things, and that is not something utopical that is far away. So I would like to ask you, how do you think about it in your presentations? I mean, this idea, this queer idea, in terms of future and design, but from the present point of view. Just one sentence. Inefficient. Inefficiency, I think that the future is in that inefficiency of bodies that are doing something inefficient, impossibilities of incompatible sexuality, of exchange that don't make any sense. So that I think that that's the space, or the type of social choreography that generates a contemporary art space should go that way. Somewhere when we are transforming this to go to somewhere that we don't know about. These spaces are spaces where we have this future, because we won't know what contemporary art will mean, and we don't know what type of space we're going to visit. So if it is beyond it's a different space, and I think that we have this inefficiency, we have to keep it. Do you want? Well, to me, if you have a look at this from the architecture point of view, utopias, the futuristic utopias, we are in a different situation. So what Andres and I have said have in common that we reflect on what we have here, and we, as a discipline of architecture, we can't say. So for many years, the architects of science fiction have been projecting. I mean, architecture has a lot to do with science fiction, and maybe it's the first way of science fiction. But now it's different. Things have evolved in such a fast way that people say, well, we are not living this way. It is as simple as, for example, a 19th century city. For example, we're living in these cities, but it is not how we work. Even in an architecture school, it could be surprising. You don't realize that we could have many conventional schools that use old-fashioned products, or obsolete products, or projects. Aren't you going to say anything? Well, what I think is interesting is that in case of, like, for example, fracking, I'm interested in it because it is overlapped. We are overlapping. We have to see what's going on. And this, for example, was the space of aggregation, of articulation, of different ways, different networks. They are overlapped spaces, but the interconnections are almost esoteric between one another's. Maybe the perceptions that the people have are not very accurate. Maybe it's a little bit mysterious. So this approach of two magical visions of alternative networks, I think that is establishing the contemporary city and this aggregation. We are having almost magical relationships. We could think that everyone's queer with Kurt Cobain, but we can sing it well or bad. Sometimes we don't sing it correctly. We are not in tune. When we have a reflexive approach, for example, you are in the world because everybody has to be here. For example, when we are seeing the difference with big D, I'm not seeing you, I'm seeing Ivan, I'm seeing a category, a philosophy category that is very well, but there's a part of connection, of understanding, of empathy, that in some logics of difference, especially in the terms of French philosophy, take us to an idealization that is not very pragmatic of how personal relationships are, and differences are badly managed between everybody. So this is the bad song, so to speak. So the good song, it is a queerization of the more the better. So it's starting to happen in the area of art. It is where the changes are taking place. And from there on, we should move up. It would be good that some of our magazines, or our most famous magazines, could queerize, or could go queer, so to speak. So that's it. Okay, so no, we're going to have lunch. So we'll start again at 3. We'll start with Maria Jerez, and we'll continue with the different roundtables, okay? So thank you very much, and thanks to the roundtable, of course. Thank you.